Is everyone ready? Support staff? Okay. So I'm Chin Lee. I'm the chair for today's meeting. And thank you everyone for coming to this police board meeting on October 20th. And to start off the meeting, I would like to ask if anybody has declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, I will then ask for the confirmation of the minutes from the meeting held on September 15th, 2016. Marie Molina, Councillor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item 3, Body 1 Camera Pilot Project, request for funds. There are debitants, so I'll hold in my name. Item 3.1, which is part of that. Item 4, Chief's administrative investigation into the custody injuries of Otmar Ingelsberger. Okay, Councillor Carroll holding that. Item 5, abuse and misuse of accessible parking permits. That's my item. Anybody has any questions, want to hold it? Otherwise, I'll move the motion to have a report from the chief. Councillor Carroll, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item 6, response to the jury recommendations from the coroner's inquest into the death of Ian Glendon Price. Seeing no debitants, does anybody want to hold it or? You're good? Anybody want to move it? Councillor Carroll, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item 7, supplementary legal services for employment and labor law, 2017 to 2019. Anybody has any questions and would like to hold it? Seeing none, Marie Molina, Ms. Molina, seconder. Councillor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Request for funds, number 8, request for funds, the Gatehouse Healing, the Voice Within Art Exhibit. Anybody wants to hold it? Wants to move it? Councillor Carroll, Mayor Tory, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And new matters, there's a walk-on agenda. Item 9, Toronto Police Service 2017 operating budget request. Anybody want to hold it? Presentation? Okay, we'll hold it for presentation. Item 10, Toronto Police Service Parking Enforcement Unit 2017 operating budget request, holding for presentation. Item 11, Toronto Police Services 2017 to 2026 capital program request, holding for presentation. Item 12, Toronto Police Services Board 2017 operating budget request, holding for presentation. Item 13, online auctioneering services contract. Any questions, any holds? If not, I'd like to have a motion to approve the recommendation. Dr. Noria, any seconder? Mayor Tory, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. This is the new item? Oh, okay. Okay. Now we go back to the held items. Oh, for consideration. Don't we go through everything first before we go to consideration? This is submission from the. This is submission. Excuse me for a minute while I.
They provided a number of submissions today, some with respect to the budgets, and that's an additional one. You can hold it,
On
and
this
we'll
one,
consider it at the end, and then we'll begin with deputations for number 3.
Okay. And there is a supplementary, like a report here for submissions, and we hold it until the end. And now we go back to the items that are held. The first one is item 3. Okay. Item 3 is the body-worn cameras pilot project request for funds, and a copy of report is available online. So, deputants on this item. The first deputant on the list is Margaret Bear from the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Is Margaret here? Okay, if she's not here, then I'll go to the next speaker, Chris Langenfield. And you know the rules, 5 minutes. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, board members. I guess the primary thing with the body-worn cameras, as we all know, one of the major concerns, I think, for the public is this question of whether the cameras should be on continuously or whether officers should be deciding to activate them at particular times. And I'll begin by referring to one of the studies that's actually included in the services report. It's on page 88 of the report, and it ends with 2 paragraphs here. Researchers found that when officers followed the protocol strictly, use of force incidents decreased by 37%. When officers had complete discretion, there was no difference in the use of force incidents between the treatment and control groups. However, when officers had discretion over whether and when to turn cameras on in the treatment condition only, use of force increased by 71%. The researchers speculate that when officers had discretion, the cameras may have been more selectively activated in situations where aggression was already escalating. They also suggest that activating the camera during a tense situation may serve to increase the person's aggression and therefore also the officers. Finally, given the findings, the researchers recommend that body-worn cameras remain on for an entire shift and that during encounters, people be reminded that the camera is present. So I think it seems that the studies, in fact, demonstrate that what studies do exist, and there don't seem to be a lot of them, having the cameras on all the time is, in fact, the best option. Originally, when we discussed this, the question seemed to be whether or not certain people would be made uncomfortable by having the cameras activated, and that seems to have fallen by the wayside. Certainly the feedback, when we look at the public response, is much lower, the number of people that are concerned about that, and now the issue has become more this question of the costs of retaining videos and things of that nature. And so I'll refer to, and I've given the Secretary a copy of a 3-page set of notes here, so I'm sure I won't get an opportunity to go through all of them related to the study here. But in terms of video retention, the service lays out what their retention policies were. They used retention periods for the in-car camera video, the same retention periods that they were using, and that was 1 year for unclassified or other videos, 2 years for Provincial Offences Acts, and 11 years for criminal-related investigations and professional standards. And I think certainly if we're talking about retaining all the videos for that length of time, then we can start to see where the number of, or the cost associated with storing these comes from. So I would suggest that, as you'll recall, I gave you a rather lengthy submission a few months ago regarding body-worn video, with some suggestions of what I think we need to do and look at for what the policy should be, and part of that was retention. And I think that videos need to be retained for the period up until the opportunity to file a complaint against an officer expires, unless charges are laid. But all the videos should be retained for that, what is now 6 months. And at that point, I think it's reasonable to destroy them. So right there, that's half of the amount of time that's apparently laid out in the proposal here. I think this is something that we need to have the discussion on with the public and the board, to come up with this information, deciding what is the appropriate retention period, and then the board needs to ask the service to go and give feedback on what are the third-party storage options for data storage, because as we know, the pilot project was based on the service maintaining all the information on their own servers, and that's certainly a large part of the extraordinary cost that they came up with. I believe it was something like $85 million for the first 10 years. And so I think we need to, after we determine what is an appropriate retention period, then get the feedback on what are the alternatives for using third-party storage and things of that nature, and work from there. Okay. There's a number of other issues here that I've highlighted from the report, and I hope you'll go through it. But certainly, I think at this point, while the pilot project information is somewhat interesting, and I note that throughout the pilot project here, it states that they don't have a lot of information on what were the implications on disciplinary hearings, trials, and things of that nature, because of the short time period that those hadn't progressed yet through the courts. But in fact, this report is dated June 16th. So we're already now that, dating from the March cutoff of this pilot, we're now up to the 6-month cutoff. So I suspect that a lot of those questions are in fact answerable today, but they weren't at the time this report was proposed. So I hope we'll be discussing this several more times, unfortunately. But I think it is a significant project that we need to go through with as quickly as possible, and I will be addressing it again once we get to the services capital budget. Thank you.
Mayor Tory, to question.
I trust you would acknowledge, I thank you for the presentation, and I think all these things being put on the record now are helpful to us and the service as they go through sorting out a lot of these very important questions. But I trust you will acknowledge, and I think it's really important today, and I may ask this question several times to make sure we get the point across, that all that is in front of us today is the money to finance a non-binding RFP to look at the cost and other implications of the equipment, and that it acknowledges in here specifically that there is more due diligence to be done on analyzing this report and on making all kinds of decisions, including some of those you referred to. Because I think you didn't suggest otherwise, but certainly the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, in their letter, implied that a decision had been made to deploy any particular number of these in any particular way, which is not true. But you have to go to the step here of doing your due diligence, of how much would it cost and all that sort of thing. So I trust you would acknowledge that if you read the report and what's in front of the board today, that's all that's here, not some decision to do this and to do it in the following conditions or circumstances. You'd acknowledge that?
I actually discussed this at the budget level because it is part of the capital budget as well. And I don't think that it's a good use of $500,000. The two things involved in that $500,000 are the hiring of a third party to give some independence, I guess, to the quoting process, and to train service staff on the latest technology. And I think the training service staff on the latest technology, if I understand that correctly, isn't an appropriate use. I think it's better off to go out and use third parties. That's something that the technology changes every few weeks. By the time it's released and available in stores, it's already not the current thing. And so to try and maintain a group of service staff up to date on all the camera information and keep that on an ongoing basis seems like a waste of funding. I think it's better off in this rare situation to go out and use expert third parties. And I suspect that for much less than the $500,000, you could have somebody else give you a full evaluation of all the options, the technologies, the RFPs, what the quoted prices are, how to implement it, and everything else. And I would think you could do that for
I acknowledge,
$100,000.
Mr. Chair, your opinion about how the $500,000 is proposed to be invested here. But you'll also, again, acknowledge, my question was more that you will acknowledge that's all that's really being debated today, because I just want to make sure the public and the media and everybody else involved are satisfied that we have a lot more work to do. This is one very important part of the exercise of going through the decision-making on body-worn cameras with the cost and the technology and, you know, regardless of where we get the information from, answering a lot of those questions. And that what we're not doing today is saying, notwithstanding that there's an entry in the budget, which is just prudent conservative budgeting, saying, well, we might do this subject to the board going through all this decision-making. I just wanted to get your acknowledgement that that's all that's in front of the board today. Not, you know, the budget will come to later and what it means when you pass a budget. It doesn't mean you have to spend the money. It means that there's been a placeholder put there in the event you do. But having said all that, the matter that you're commenting on right now is $500,000, for better or for worse, to do the due diligence, correct?
It's actually two items here that we're receiving, number 3 and number 3.1. And so number 3 is actually the pilot project evaluation report,
But
which
all
we
is-
haven't discussed publicly and there has been no feedback. So
And I totally
that is
welcome
more
your
of
comments
what
on
I was
that.
giving
Okay,
there
that's
in
fine.
the first part. Certainly the other item here, the $500,000, is we're talking about having something done there. Whether or not it's the service going ahead with what they've recommended for this $500,000 in the budget is the best choice, I'm not sure it is. But I certainly agree that the board isn't looking at jumping ahead and simply implementing this with $500,000 into that funding.
Okay, Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, I'm a little confused now because you said you thought we'd be better served by a third party coming in and looking at this, and I'm having trouble understanding why other external expertise doesn't meet that requirement that you would be comfortable with.
Well, my understanding of what the $500,000 requested is that it's for two things, essentially a third party to review the RFP process.
A fairness commissioner, right?
Right, and then the second part being to train service staff in arriving at the expertise. That was my, I'm getting a no, okay,
External
so.
expertise required to effectively oversee, manage, and analyze the body-worn camera non-binding RFP. And the reason I ask this is I know that you depute a lot here, but that pretty much meets a benchmark of the city. If the city were entering into a procurement of 85 million, possibly more, and particularly where it's not a one-time build, but a procurement that is going to lead to a huge operating impact of capital down the road, and this is one of those. It will affect the service in ongoing expenditures. This is exactly the procurement procedure they would follow, and I think we have to measure ourselves against their procurement thing. That's the way they see the use of external expertise, that they oversee, particularly this non-binding part of the RFP, because that's where we can draw the most on the external expertise. Are we asking the right questions? If we sit down with Panasonic or Motorola or et cetera, what's the broader scan of the product sector? That's where we want the external expertise, is at this phase. And isn't that third party enough for you?
Part of my concern here is that I from my point of view, that should have been where the pilot project started. The idea that we went through a one-year pilot project for $432,000 in order to now come up and say, okay, now we're going to consult with experts to see what the technology options are and how we should be using that, seems to me to be putting it backwards. I think we should have done that part of the process long before we went to a pilot project, and I think part of that comes down to the fact that the board wasn't really involved in starting the pilot project. That was more a service-initiated thing that the board just approved and got reported to after the fact. At this point, I certainly think we need to have expertise, and obviously that needs to be hired. $500,000 just sounds like a lot of money for that purpose to me.
No arguments here, but
I've been involved in setting up technology solutions with corporations and things of that nature, and certainly the fees never come up to anything like that. So that's part of why I'm balking at that a little.
okay. Those are my questions of the deputant.
Does anybody else have any questions? Ms. Molyneux? Okay, before, so if nobody has any questions, I got to ask the next deputant first. We got to go through our deputations first.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. The next deputant is Derek Moran. And Mr. Moran, you know the rules, so 5 minutes.
Actually, just to remind you, because you referred to me as Mr., at the end of the last executive committee meeting, as you can see here, Mayor Tory referred to me as Derek, sole living beneficiary. Thank you very much, sir. So basically, this is how I see body cameras being used as a deterrent to any possible bad behavior on the part of an police officer in the future. Just this week is Access to Justice Week, and I was at an Access to Justice event on Monday where the topic of insurance came up, and a lawyer that was there helping out actually conceded to me that Her Majesty, the Queen, is the surety for the person we all have. I know I couldn't believe it myself. I just about fell out of my chair. But do you remember the meeting a few months ago where I explained security and mentioned in the Constitution of the security of the person? It was an item that had to do with training for police officers somehow. It also mentioned in this item training in regards to how to deal with these free men on the land. Basically, these are people who have figured out Peter Hogg's clarification of Section 32.1 of the Constitution. And by the way, I forgot during that meeting that in the Factors Act of Ontario, warrant is part of the definition given for document of title. The birth certificate we're all given as a document of title. So people don't know this, but last week, Chair Pringle spent a good chunk of time at the end of the mini-budget meeting last week with some of us, speaking with us and answering our questions, well, really Chris and Dion's questions. And part of what he mentioned about body cameras was that he was quite adamant that it is also about police officers who want to be protected as well with the wearing of a body camera in terms of potentially using it to cover their butts. I bring this up because I don't know if you've ever been asked a question, anyone's ever been asked a question by this journalist, Graphic Matt Elliott. But Graphic Matt made a couple of tweets in regards to a suspected sovereign citizen that spoke at the last executive committee meeting again. Except, here's his tweets here, sovereign citizen and sovereign citizenry. But the problem with that is that he was actually referring to me. So, okay, let's just say for a sec that Graphic Matt is right. Now I'm a kooky sovereign citizen that thinks acts and statutes don't apply to him on dry land because they're based on maritime laws. The Supreme Court of Canada basically said in Tropwood AG versus Savaco Wire and Nail Company 1979. Sovereign citizens in the media have been portrayed as being dangerous. Chair Pringle, as I've already mentioned, said that these officers have made it known that they also want to be protected by with the use of body cameras. So I, the kooky sovereign citizen, crossed paths with a Toronto police officer. Police officer has the perception that a sovereign citizen is dangerous, so the police officer wants to be protected. The officer then turns on the body camera to record any potential ensuing mayhem that would be used against me later. And I say into the camera, "Hi, peace officer, common law constable, how are you? Take notice that I am here in good faith, and as I do not consent to being surety in any matter this may result in, then I require you to inform me Who is the surety for the person I have, and where is the surety for the person I have, peace officer? Peace officer, common law constable, probably then looks at me, blinks, sighs, tells me to have a nice day, begins to walk away from me, and turns off his body camera. And why does he do this? Because the officer knows full well that if the matter were to go to court, and I say to the justice, what evidence has this court been given that I have surety in this matter? The officer knows very well that if it were to get that far, that the court, the justice, and especially the Crown are not going to be very happy with him if, as part of that evidence, he plays video from his body camera that has me record as saying on it, as I do not consent to being surety in any matter this may result in, then I require you to inform me who is the surety for the person I have and where is the surety for the person I have, peace officer. Because as I mentioned to Mayor Tory and City Manager Peter Wallace at the last executive committee, what's really legal in the legal system? Legal is all about surety and accounting. Legal equals accounting and surety. Oh, and I also might ask the officer on camera why the definition for person in the criminal code is Her Majesty in an organization. And if you ask Councillor Greb, she knows that I am not Her Majesty in an organization. You're looking like you're about to say something to me. And I also just wanted to point out that in this report that the term public trust was mentioned a few times. So just a reminder, when it comes to banks, money, government legislation, then it's the legal definition that matters, as legal dictionaries just weren't created to decorate coffee tables with. So in the Dictionary of Canadian Law, the definition of public trust is a trust established to benefit the public or a section of it. So my suggestion then
30
would be-
seconds and wrap up.
Okay.
30 seconds and wrap up.
I would suggest then the best way to do this is to bust those who don't feel like upholding the public trust and as a result breach the public trust.
Thank you. Good timing. Any questions from the applicant? Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Miguel Avila. Mr. Avila, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me get set up here. So we are here to make comments on the $500,000 proposal for to hire civilians. Companies to give us their expertise. I have a solution for you. $500,000. Trust me. As an expert, we have an organization called Toronto Cat Watch. Toronto Cat Watch is an application that can be pulled out of your iPhone. It can start recording police. Why I say this? Because this is the only way viable that we can ensure that police officers do not turn off their cameras when they're interacting with us. Before you read what's going on in the States, it will happen the same here in Toronto. The unions will tell their officers, their members of the union, do not have to record things because otherwise your employee is going to fire your ass. So you see, we have to make sure that the people film the police. Even though they have a camera, we have the right to defend ourselves and record them. It's easy to join. All you have to do is click on Toronto Cat Watch. Anybody can join and become a cat watcher and make sure that police are accountable of their crimes. I want to say also another item. The project that you're talking about to provide with cameras to everybody and the police force, it can pay off for itself. You know how? Because the number of complaints will come down, the number of lawsuits will come down as well, and then we have extra cash so you can have the money to pay for those cameras. You don't need to come to Toronto taxpayers who have been carrying this burden of paying $1.2 billion for this police force, which is outrageous. Outrageous, my friends. We need to reduce it. We need to use new technologies that can assure that we have a better police services instead of overpay officers watching over potholes. And lastly, and not least, the Forcillo case, yes, I use sucks. So that's why we have to keep our police officers and watching them and recording them. I've been trying for the last time to tell you, keep calm and film the police. And also, I don't understand why this board doesn't have a screen or a device that I can pull this information out instead of to bring in my shirts. Isn't that a shameful? Because we have technology at City Hall. Mayor Tory can tell you about it. We have a scanner. We can, put in the display. We have better technology, but here in this place, we don't even have Wi-Fi. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Avila. A question from Ms. Molina.
Question.
You're in-
Thank you, Mr. Avila. I have 3 questions for you. I'll ask all 3 of them. They're short.
Okay, I'll try my best.
Do you know who developed the Toronto Cop Watch app? And have you used it? Or do you know anyone who's used that? And if so, what happened?
I'm not the developer. It's Mr. Batiste. It's an engineer who developed it free to Torontonians. It's currently available on iPhone. We're still struggling to have it on Android application. It has been successfully used for the purpose of recording evidence that can be used in court for lawyers. And what was your last question again?
You answered it was, if you have used it, what happened?
What happened? Well, police officers take vacation pay. The lawyers are paid by the city, which in turn results in insurance costs to Toronto taxpayers. Our insurance are going up because of it. So we don't see really results that can assure us that police officers, they're not about the law, and they need to be shown the door to jail. When they commit a crime, please go to jail. We don't have it. Okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't going down that line, and I think I have the answers to my question. My question was really, if this app has been used by members of the public,
Yes.
when it's actually being used, when you're having an interaction as the user
Yes.
with the police, were you able to tell us anything about how that interaction played out? But it was very narrow under those circumstances. So if you have used this app yourself to film the police, how did that work on the ground?
Inspiring people not to be afraid to record the police and ensure that citizens have the right to film the police officers, because we have a lot of expectation in our police officers. They're supposed to be peace officers, not people that start to abuse citizens. So I'm hopeful that you can listen to us. As Chris expressed, we have spent some time with Mr. Pringle here off camera talking about this important matter, because we feel that it's time for the public to get engaged in this kind of activities. We always come here to talk to you, but you never say to us, Miguel or Chris or Tere, come, join us, how can we help the Toronto citizens? But you prefer to pay a consultant. What is this, like an Ontario government, $11.2 billion to reduce electricity bill for the poor?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gracias.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Avila. And now we bring it to board members. Is there any questions of staff? Yes.
So
Ms.
my
Molnar?
question probably, I'll direct it to the Executive Director, Joanne Campbell, who may need to work with the registrar. I'm realizing that we have a number of deputations, both on this is about the deputations on body-worn cameras and the documentation of it for the purpose of the ultimate discussion, which we have yet to have. So I'm wondering if the way we set up the public website for other issues, we could capture the work that has been done, the deputations from over the past year in one place, so that we could all access, including, for example, the deputations today in one place, a record of the body-worn camera discussions that we've been having at this board. Thank you.
Currently, those deputations are all indexed on the website and are searchable under body-worn cameras. But if it's the board's wish, a separate tab could be created for body-worn cameras for ease of reference.
That's exactly what I'm asking for. Thank you.
Councillor Carroll, question?
Yeah, I want to unpack the paragraph that Chris brought up on page 88. I didn't read every single page, but towards the end, you really start to read the feedback page. So I was stuck on this one as well, but I think I interpreted it a bit differently. So I kind of want to ask staff to unpack it for me. The researchers found that when officers followed the protocol strictly, use of force incidents decreased by 37%. That's a compelling statement. What I'm frustrated by is it talks about where there is a protocol, then where the results aren't as good when it's entirely up to the officer's discretion. And then at the end it talks about, we recommend they're on all the time. There's a bit of a leap there. In just sort of an informal look, it seems like the camera use develops around whatever culture and based on whatever incidents are happening from service to service to service around North America. So there's entirely up to the officer's discretion, which has usually come about in communities where the officers feel we're set upon, no one trusts us, we're going to wear these cameras. Then there are places where it's community driven, we're being set upon and we want cameras on all the time. There is an in-between. There are a few, and now of course the city's escaped my memory. There are a few places where it's not on every minute of the shift, but there is a strict protocol. And that's what they're talking about in the first sentence. Is the intention, if we go forward, to set up a very strict protocol? Because if that was the case, there may be some balance between, because we're developing policy on what is an interaction, what's an informal and non-arrest and arrest. We're going through all of those things. Can we take our other policies and the Police Service Act and come up with a very strict policy that protects both the residents and the officers, but might not necessarily literally mean on for 8 hours?
So I can answer, well, perhaps the chief has a comment to make first.
Yeah, first and foremost, there was a lot of, I think the big misunderstanding is the amount of comprehensive work that was put together by the team to create the procedure when we started the pilot project.
Right.
And the fact that we did not do this in a silo, we did not make it an arbitrary, when you feel you turn it on, you do, and when you turn it off, you don't. We worked with the Ministry Attorney General's office, the Privacy Commissioner, who basically said it should not be turned on and kept on for privacy issues, human rights, OIPRD, SIU, a whole host of people that we assisted to work out to find the best procedure in place. Now, I can tell you right now from a North American perspective, where the failures occurred, where the key failures occurred, is when there was a lack of planning, lack of understanding, lack of putting the proper procedures together, and not understanding what the details are behind everything. So I'm very confident with the team that put this together for what they did. Believe me, this is not about arbitrarily turning it on and off. In fact, it is more to make sure that we try our very best to have some sort of objective evidence for encounters that we have whenever we're dealing with the public on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So for instance, when you come back inside the division house, you may still be on shift for another hour and a half, but the thing will be turned off. Presumably you could turn it off if all you're doing is sitting in the division house interacting with other officers. We don't want to get locked into some literal wording that's not understood. But in the pilot, there was a protocol. It wasn't just turn it on when you feel like you better cover yourself.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, it was very. There were some very good, well thought out guidelines with all of those entities that I spoke about.
So could we take those and the feedback, and as we get closer to deploying them out into the system, the board could review the protocol to see if it's exactly the same as during the pilot, it's improved over what was in the pilot, takes into account community feedback, et cetera, et cetera? Could that be a part of the steps we'll take over the next year?
Our procedures, which the chief has referenced, are very strict in both the instructions and the guidance that we provide to police officers, the board has an opportunity to review the procedures with us because our procedures are as a result of board policies.
So going forward, we'll have that opportunity later. Because you can appreciate, we don't want to end up starting with a protocol, not having looked at it, it's amended court decision by court decision by, like, it could be the future of body worn cameras. It's court decision by court decision. We start to develop the real policy. We don't want to start out in that vein. Okay, and then the other thing is the issue of the $500,000. Is that, first of all, I hate the cost of fairness commissioners. Let me put you on record. Consultants and fairness commissioners have a pretty sweet gig. It's quite a growing industry. The wacky industry of environmental assessment is quite lucrative for a subset of the 1%. That being said, is that 500,000 an upset limit? We're going to do a classic tender to find a fairness commissioner, and it would follow our same procurement process of lowest bidder, et cetera, et cetera. Is that not the case?
Just to provide some context, the Fairness Commissioner and other expertise were just examples of things that we would think we would need to do our due diligence on an investment. It's going to be quite significant. And so we want to ensure that we protect ourselves, both from an RFP perspective, but more importantly, a contractual perspective. We're looking now at cloud technologies, which is a completely different business model. So we want to be able, so you answer your question, the 500,000 is an upset limit. If we require more, obviously we'd have to come back to the board. It's just monies that we think would be prudently spent and would protect us and allow us to do our due diligence in what will be a significant financial investment. We want to do it right. We want to make sure that the services interests are protected in terms of contractual agreements that we will be entering into. And Jane can tell you, IT contracts by their nature are a little bit more complicated. And so you want to make sure that you protect yourself not only in the short term, but in the long term, because that's usually where you get it.
Okay, and with respect to expertise coming out, I know that the technology just keeps changing and changing and changing, but we're getting a body of feedback about people being concerned about when they get turned on, and my concern is that is coming from this relatively brand new use in Canada. In fact, when you start to go down the internet rabbit hole with this, there's a far bigger growing concern over when they get turned off. And by accident is a quite common problem. There are products being developed that make it very, very hard to turn them off. That you have to stop and hold a button for 4 seconds. You can't tousle it off while in pursuit, which has been a problem in some early adopters of the technology. So is our scope broad enough that we're going to look at even the new and emerging technologies that might resolve issues? And is the look what concerns you've encountered, or are you going to do the same sort of web search I've done? So you're looking at court decisions, you're looking at problems, and who's got a product that solves this one, because it seems to be cropping up all over the place. Is it that broad a scan of the technology?
So the simple answer is yes.
Yes.
So the non-binding RFP allows us to ask all of those questions and get, to the fullest extent possible, specific answers to those questions before going out and actually purchasing and deploying. The non-binding RFP gives us a chance to thoroughly examine those questions, recognizing that technology is changing moment by moment. And so we want to have the opportunity to be fully informed and fully up to date when we make the decision. And that would take into account guards against inadvertent turning the camera off or the camera failing mid-tour of duty.
Right.
Issues around, any emerging issues around privacy and confidentiality that might occur during the intervening time. Storage, as Mr. Veneziano indicated, is advancing and evolving technology now. The purpose of the non-binding RFP is allow us to canvass the various vendors to get definitive answers to these questions before committing any further funds to it. And
Okay.
the investment the board is making by granting us this money will allow us to do that. Your return on investment will be a sound product policy and practice in place for the future.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. You can put me down to speak.
Okay. Any further questions? Well, I have a couple of questions myself. Now, earlier it's mentioned that $85 million over 10 years is capital cost, but it doesn't include some of the other administrative and support costs. But the biggest cost of all is what is written here, in that 2 hours per shift, estimated of $20,000 per officer annually. I multiply by 4,000 officers, that's $80 million per year. Would that be considered a productivity times 10? Okay, so would that be a productivity loss to the force? To the service?
Potentially, if officers' time is spent administering the program, it does take them away from their primary mandate of patrol, enforcement, security, crime prevention. So we're mindful of that potential and the risks associated to that. So that, again, would be part of our RFP to make sure that we have a product that limits or minimizes officer administration time.
So in your final report, after you bring back the RFP, will all these costs be included, including all the administrative costs and so on?
Well, that
To
would
give
be
a better idea?
That would be our expectation, yes.
Thank you very much. And to speak, Mayor Tory first.
Chair. First of all, I want to thank you for the work you've done to date, and I just want to, because again, I'm concerned that the one letter in particular that's on the public file from the Accountability Coalition on this and on tasers suggests that in either case today, because there's an entry in the budget, there's actually a decision being made, and quite to the contrary. I just want to advance the case, Mr. Chair, that this is precisely the kind of due diligence that any public or private body should be expected to do, and precisely the kind of investigation of all of the questions, including those raised by all of our deputants and by the members of the board here, that represents good practice. In fact, I would say if we didn't have a fairness commissioner, much as I agree with Councillor Carroll, the cost can seem exorbitant and probably is, but if we didn't have one, if we didn't have some outside technical advisors who we also have to pay, we would be criticized for not doing so. And justifiably so. And so I'm with Councillor Carroll, and I think I've heard the members of the service say they want to minimize those costs, and the $500,000 is an upside number. But having said that, I think the very fact we're doing this is precisely the right way to go about this. The second thing I would like to say is I would support the suggestion made by Councillor Carroll that the work be done now, and I had the sense from a number of your answers, including to Councillor Lee's questions, that you're going to be coincidentally doing other work on being able to come forward and say, here is our best suggestion as to a protocol, and it'll be partly dependent upon what you hear back on the technology and whether there are devices that help you not have the cameras turned off and this kind of thing, and advice from the privacy commissioner and all this sort of thing, so that what we're not ending up in here is an endless kind of spin cycle where we're sitting here a year and a half from today not having yet made a decision on not just the acquisition of this technology, but also how it will be deployed. So I'm certainly hopeful that is the case, and it sounds like you're working away at that, and some of these things were in fact canvassed on a preliminary basis prior to the pilot project. And so I'm just very hopeful that we'll be doing this work concurrently so that all of these things can come back here by way of sort of a consolidated presentation that says, here's what we learned from the RFP, here's what we've, here's what we're suggesting with respect to the protocol, and so on and so on and so on. Finally, I just want to say that all of these comments I make as a supporter in principle of this, and obviously it's subject to everything that comes back with respect to the hardware and the cost of the time of the police officers and all that. But I believe the investment we're making in this part of the process at $500,000 or less will pay itself back many times over in terms of a better product that we get and a better protocol and so on. And I believe that the investment will ultimately, I believe we will ultimately make in body-worn cameras, but that's subject to be seen. I think it will pay a huge return, even though the numbers sound very big, and they are big. but it'll pay a huge return in terms of the most important thing we're here to achieve of all, which is to maintain and improve the level of confidence and trust and transparency involved in policing. And so I just wish you well in this work. I urge you to get it done as quickly as possible, but maintaining quality at all times. And please come back with a comprehensive report that suggests here's how we could implement this that accompanies any recommendation you make to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll?
Yes, I'm very mindful of the deputations, but I'm not sure that I 100% agree with all of them. I think that this is kind of new. This is a new kind of transparency in terms of a major procurement at the Police Services Board, that you're hearing this much about the process. And so I think in ways it may be misinterpreted, but the reality is we absolutely need this. This will be the biggest contract for a new technology in the country, which makes us a sitting duck at that point in time. And so you want fairness monitors and integrity commissioners and lobbyist registries are all sort of rising into the municipal sector at the same time. But while all those things exist at the city, they don't necessarily exist here. I want a fairness commissioner to come and sit here in this board at the end of this first phase and be able to tell me how much access potential vendors had to the officers. I know this won't happen, but I want to know if you were flown to Philadelphia for a hockey game. That has happened in the history of the city over a big procurement. So a fairness commissioner will be here to make sure that we're giving fair access to our scan of the technology across the sector, and our discussions to go mining for their input. And you get a lot of input. In a sales pitch on a product, sometimes the vendor raises problems that we hadn't anticipated yet, that we hadn't encountered yet, but they have experienced it with other customers. We've talked a lot about when they go on, which means that's sort of what has risen up. When is it going to be turned on in our community? I guarantee you, the vendor who might come and say, I'm going to make it really hard to turn this thing off, he's going to tell our service chapter and verse how many times services have ended up in expensive court proceedings because it magically failed or turned off just as the tussle began. I want to know who's got the best technology for all of those things. And public procurement is such that it's very hard to gather all that information once you're in mid-tender. This allows us to gather as much information in a non-binding way and with oversight over and above what we can provide in a monthly board meeting as volunteers to this process. And this is a full-time job, because the degree to which technology companies are going to descend upon our service and lobby them to be the person who ends up with a successful contract will be full-time. So I want somebody full-time engaged in making sure that the process is accountable, is transparent, and as informative as possible, so that we know that this thing that is going to have an operating impact of capital that is at this point incalculable. I also think that while we've got a bare scan of they will all have to sit and watch our footage for 2 hours a day, we haven't actually made that decision yet. We haven't decided if the purpose of storing that footage is complaint-based or self-examination-based, or are we just storing it until some outside external complaint comes? We haven't decided those things yet. Those policy decisions are yet to come. So we know that some of the things that we need to consider in those policies will also come from this non-binding process, because we will learn from it every challenge that every service who's gone down this road and every board that has gone down it with them has already encountered. And I hope to see that at the report that comes at the end of this first thing. It will be another 88 pages, because we will want to know all of those things that surfaced before we push the button and start a tender that will have a blackout period. Because once we get into blackout, we can't do anything else until you come to us and say, this is the price. And And so we've got to get this first part right. So while I know the cost is hard to swallow, there's a lot of work that comes after we decide on which product we're buying, and a lot of policy work to do, and we need all of this foundational work. So as much as people hate seeing it in the budget, I like the mayor, heartily support it.
Yes, Mr. Jeffers?
Yes, excuse me, there has been a lot of, the kind of comparative analysis that you've done, I am imagining that you have done some comparative analysis of the experiences south of the border, et cetera. Are there some points that really stand out to you when we're looking at it, using it here in Toronto? Because, you know, some of the criticisms and recommendations that have been made, you know, in the States have been quite strong, and I don't know how much of an analysis we've done with that. Can you comment on this?
We were very mindful of the interest across the world in body-worn camera, and so we did collect as much information as we could on the experiences of other jurisdictions in Canada, in the United States, and the UK. We have specific observations if you want us to share those with you, but generally speaking, there has been a range of success, I'll use that word advisedly, in the introduction. And just today, there's an article in the Calgary Herald indicating that Calgary Police has completely scrapped its body-worn camera program to start all over again. And it cites reasons related both to technology and to policies and procedures that were the reasons. So that's the most recent, that's today's news about the Calgary experience. So we want to make sure we're not the headlines of the next news cycle. We're looking very carefully, as we already have, in a range of issues surrounding the introduction of body-worn camera. And the RFP will allow us to even dig deeper to make sure that we're not trapped by some sales pitch, as the councillor indicates, or some new development that looks very promising but hasn't yet been tested. Furthermore, I want to reassure both the board and the community, very thorough research was done into issues around privacy, around officer conduct, around public safety. So I'll remind the board on page 7, on the board's report, dealing with body-worn camera, we consulted with external advisory groups, and I'll just name a few because I think it gives you an indication of the depth. So the Information and Privacy Commissioner, the Human Rights Commission, the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, the Special Investigations Unit, the Attorney General, because of course we're capturing images that might end up in court, the Association of Chiefs of Police, mental health advisors, the Chiefs, our Toronto Chiefs consultative committees, Community Engagement Advisory Group, and the Toronto Police Services Board. 2 members were part of the review of the project once it was initiated. And as we learn about more groups or agencies that have some appropriate interest in it, we're receiving information from those groups. And we continue to monitor worldwide interest in body-worn cameras.
Actually, we are in the speaking phase, but I allowed the variance in this to ask questions, okay? But anyways, we are in the speaking phase, so do you have any further... Anybody else to speak? I will say a couple of things myself. Number one, there is a submission from the Toronto Police Accountability, written submission from Accountability Coalition, that the first speaker, either John Sewell or Margaret Bear, was supposed to present. I think we can take that as accepting that as a written deputation. And having heard all the deputants, I support the recommendation to go forward and spend the $500,000. And I think one of the speakers was saying that I can do it cheaper. I mean, I've had experience in the past where I've hired somebody and they only report on what they know. So we got to be sure that we get the best, most independent report back. Okay, so I've had experience in that area, and we have to bring back most up-to-date information and also have the fairness monitor as well as get the non-binding RFP. So there's a lot of work. I mean, in the private industry, we don't have a report out, we are as transparent, but in the public forum, we have to be very transparent and open and report out. I mean, no different than comparing it to, if I were to disconnect my own downspout, it cost me $20. If I get somebody else to do it, it costs me $500, okay? Because there's a lot more administrative work to be done, okay? But anyways, and I think that we have motions to move. Does anybody else have any other motions before I move this ones? Okay. These are the motions that the board received the deputations and written submissions, that the board approved the chief's report dated September 13th, 2016, and the board received the body-worn camera pilot project evaluation report as noted in 3.1 of the agenda, as well as the recommendation of the item, which is the board approved the inclusion of a body-worn camera system project in the Toronto Police Services 2017 to 2026 capital program in the amount of $500,000 to cover the cost of a fairness commissioner and other external expertise required to effectively oversee, manage, and analyze the body-worn camera non-binding request for proposals process, including the evaluation of proposals. Mayor Tory, seconder, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the next item, item 4, the chief's administrative.
Go to 9 because there are deputations.
Okay, you want deputation first before I go back. All right. So I've been advised that we have to go through all the items with deputation first. All right, number 9, the Toronto Police Service 2017 operating budget request, presentation by Tony, our Chief Operating Administrative Officer, Tony Venezuela. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. We're before you today to present the Toronto Police Services 2017 operating budget request, our 2017 to 26 capital program request, and the parking enforcement 2017 budget request. Assisting me with the presentation today is our Director of Finance and Business Management, Sandra Calafreddi, and our Manager of Budgets and Financial Analysis, Cindy Grant. Just to provide some background, the budget that's before you today has been reviewed by the board's budget subcommittee and was also presented as a preliminary request for public deputation at the public meeting of the board's budget subcommittee on October 11th, 2016. You should also note that in the spirit of transparency and providing the public and the board with as much information as possible with respect to our budget, prior to the October 11th meeting, we also posted our complete budget at the unit level on the board's website, and provided a line-by-line account of our total budget, which also showed previous years' experience. So 2017 will be very much a transitional year for all three of these budgets that are presented for you today. As the board knows, in June 2016, the Transformational Task Force tabled its interim report and made 24 recommendations, preliminary recommendations, to basically guide activities that will ultimately modernize the way that we deliver services to the public. That report, like I said, contained 24 recommendations, set a target of $100 million in saving over the next 3 years, and also identified concrete savings from a hiring moratorium on both the civilian and uniform side. A final report will be provided to the board in January 2017, and that report will basically firm up the recommendations that were made in June, perhaps have some additional recommendations, but more importantly, set a roadmap in terms of how we now execute and implement the recommendations that the task force put forward. So part of the hiring moratorium, which we would call the roughing in process, this is basically the foundation that allows us to not hire and make investments in filling positions that could very well change or be eliminated as part of the task force, as part of the implementation of modernizing the way that the service does business. The service, and I think it's important to note, the service already has started the process of cost containment. And you'll see, and you'll hear later on in the report in the presentation, some of the activities and some of the costs that we've begun to eliminate. But this is really to now move the service forward in terms of, and act as a guide, use the Transformational Task Force as a guide to future savings. So the goal of the 2017 operating budget was to achieve 0%. This was the initial budget that we looked at in probably June of this year. And for the first time, we've actually come in below zero, $2 million or 0.2%. We are going to look and review policies. We're going to look at the way our members think about costs. We want value for money to be at the forefront from the PC4 to the chief in terms of the activities that they perform and making sure that every activity they perform adds value to the goals of the service, which are community safety. So the city manager identified preliminary budget pressures for 2017 citywide of $483 million. And that pressure assumed that the services pressure would be zero. We've actually achieved that zero and actually have found another $2 million on top of that. And we've done that, and I want to emphasize this. It's not just $2 million below 2014, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. We've actually found close to $50 million of identified pressures to actually get us below that $2 million, or that zero amount. So when we start the budget process, the first thing we do is we start with our approved 2016 approved budget. And then based on information that we know at the time, we basically identify pressures that we know that we're going to have to deal with. So as an example, we knew that benefits are trending higher. We knew that there was going to be some inflation in terms of some of the contracts that we have with various vendors. We knew that we have to start, if we're going to be responsible, both short and long term, we can't keep deferring reserves to, or contributions to reserves that allow us to buy equipment that we need in terms of investments in technology, but also meet obligations that are required under the collective agreements. The TTF makes a number of recommendations. Those recommendations, those activities will actually require money and investments in order to be able to carry them out efficiently and effectively. And so we estimated that we would probably require about $3.5 million to purchase expertise that we need, to purchase capacity that we need, because remember, we're in a moratorium, in order to actually move forward on the recommendations of the task force. We also knew at the time, and based on information, that we still didn't have signed contracts with the province in terms of our, both our CPP grant as well as the Safer Communities grant. And so there was a pressure there of $14.9 million. And finally, we know that based on the collective agreements that negotiated between the board and the TPA and the SU, that we had a salary settlement pressure of $18.3 million going into 2017. All those pressures add up to $47.4 million, and so our preliminary request before doing anything was 1052, which is a 5% increase over 2016. So we had a lot of money to find, and we started a very thorough process that basically looked at every account in our ledger. We looked at policies that sometimes drive expenditures and revenue. We looked at strategies in terms of how we could perhaps bridge certain costs, and we looked at different ways of doing business in terms of trying to cover these costs. So we closed that $47.4 million gap by reducing premium pay by a further $2 million. We have already reduced premium pay by $7 million in the last 4 or 5 years. We've now reduced it another $2 million, so we've actually reduced premium pay across the service by $9 million over the last 5 years. The TTF, basically looked at, we're going to deal and we're going to provide core policing services, and those services that are non-core to our mandate really should be provided by others. And so they identified both the school crossing guard program as well as the lifeguard program as non-core items. The 2017 cost of those items, as we take them out of our budget, is $3.8 million. That annualizes to about $7.6 million on a full-year basis. We took a number of different management action to actually reduce. We reduced our number of vehicles by 6%, 104 vehicles. That saves us $600,000, and we're just getting started in that. We looked at all of the discretionary, non-core items and made across-the-board reductions in those areas. We worked very closely with vendors and actually negotiated lower prices with vendors to basically reduce our costs. And we looked at all historical spending and made sure that we could justify every cent that we needed in 2017, and where we couldn't, we made reductions in those areas. We had various staffing strategies that found us another $6.2 million. And then we looked at alternative funding sources. So as an example, I talked about the $3.5 million investment that we would have to make to basically help us move forward with the implementation of the recommendations from the TTF. So what we're proposing, and the city CFO has agreed in principle, is that we would take some monies from our surplus in 2016 and use that as seed money to allow us. So we would set up a modernization reserve that we could tap into as required to fund some of the investments that are going to be very much required if we're going to do the implementation of the task force recommendations the right way. And finally, we implemented a hiring moratorium that basically said we're not going to be hiring any uniform or civilian positions for the next 3 years. And in 2017, that translates to $23.1 million. I will say on the civilian side, there are some positions like communication operators, which is the first point of contact for a person in crisis or an emergency. Those are mission critical positions, so we will be exempting those positions from the hiring moratorium. But everything else is on the table. Everything else goes through scrutiny right up to the chief. And only those positions that are mission critical will be replaced in the future. Just want to say that the hiring moratorium and the other thing that it basically allows us to right-size the organization, recognizing that at some point we're going to have to make investments as we develop new structures with new competencies. But like I said before, it doesn't make a lot of sense to fill certain positions that we really, at this point, don't know whether we're going to need or if, in fact, they're going to change in terms of how we deliver services in the future. So this is the accounting. And you'll see that everything is in red except a couple of categories. Benefits, because our benefits are and continue to increase. Even though we've taken steps, we've actually had we have a contract with the city and the TTC. This is the second sort of phase of that contract. that I think certainly help to contain the rising costs. But nonetheless, we're seeing a pressure in those areas for basically what are collectively bargained benefits, employee benefits. And that's a pressure of about 1.5 million. And then, as I indicated before, we have to start making contributions to the reserves. It's fiscally irresponsible to continue to do what we have been doing up to now, and so we have to start making some contributions, and so there's a 4.3 million contribution there. And what we've done is we've mitigated that by 2.5 million by, again, asking the city CFO if we could use our surplus to make a one-time contribution to those reserves and basically ensure the health of the reserves, that reserve, at least for another year. So as everybody knows, the biggest part of our budget, or our people are our greatest assets, but they're also the greatest part of our budget. So it's really important that we ensure that these resources, these people are used as efficiently as possible, and that every activity they perform is value added and actually contributes to the mission of effective community safety. Our goals, and these are goals that were set up by the TTF, and I think they're important goals because these are the things that are going to guide us moving forward, not only for the next 3 years, but beyond that as well. And that's to be where the public needs us most, to enhance partnerships, to create safe communities, and to focus on the complex needs of a large city. And the result of all this will be a modernized police service that places communities at its core, embraces partnerships, is intelligence-led, and optimizes the use of resources and technology. So here is the biggest part of our budget, and that's salaries. And as everybody knows, that makes up about 89% of our total budget, and that includes salaries, benefits, as well as premium pay. This chart here basically shows a historical representation of where we've come. The dark line is our approved position establishment. Those are the approved positions that we have at the uniform level. And you can see we started at 5618, and then over the last few years, because of civilization, we actually reduced the number of approved positions to 5448. But the more important number is the one in the bars. And you'll see that we've gone from 5615 and are projecting about 5072 in 2017. And with the hiring moratorium, we'll be at around 4767 in 2019. And so those are not positions. Those are actually bodies that provide a number of different services. And I want to emphasize that these 5,000 officers don't just provide response to what will now be priority calls. Those are the things that the public sees. There's a lot of officers that are involved in investigative duties, in public order assignments, ensuring our accountability and risk management is maintained. We are a large city. We have a lot of special events. We have demonstrations. We have a public order unit that allows us to make sure that those demonstrations are safe for both the participants as well as the community. And so that's what this buys us, 5,000 of those officers. And by the way, those officers work in shifts, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So as I indicated before, in 2010, we had 5,615 officers, not an approved establishment. These are not positions, these are bodies. By 2017, we'll probably have gone down about close to 600 to 5072. And by 2019, we'll be at 4667. That's a drop of 848 officers since 2010, or 15%. And the decision not to hire, these were all driven by budget pressures. But now as the TTF comes into play, there is an opportunity to do things differently so that we can mitigate the risks and still provide the level of service that we need to provide. I think it's important sometimes to compare ourselves to other organizations. There's no American cities here because the American experience and the environment is much different. But certainly when you look at Canadian cities and where we stack up, the regional, the suburban police services are normally below per capita. And you'll see that that pattern applies both in Montreal, Quebec, and also out west with Vancouver and the surrounding services there. But you'll see that even right now, before our reductions, we're below both Montreal and Vancouver in terms of officers per 100,000. We're at 193. By 2019, we'll be at 167. So the question we ask ourselves, and the question that probably you're asking and the public is asking, so you're going to be down to 4,750 officers. How are you going to continue to deliver services? The first thing we looked at is the demand for policing services, the environment that we work at. We have a large city that's changing every day. It's a diverse city. Crime is changing, and there are threats that previously didn't exist in our cities, and cities actually across the world. And crime trends that were decreasing are now starting to go the other way. And so how are we going to meet these challenges? We're going to focus on core policing services. In other words, those services that a police service shouldn't be providing that are not core to our mission will be transferred to others. We're going to change the way that we do business, the way we actually provide those services. We're going to evolve. We have to be nimble and evolve and adapt to new conditions. We have to deliver services with fewer members and placing those fewer members in the right place at the right time, doing the right things the right way. And we want to do this in a much more affordable way. I think it's also important that we share with the board and the public where we're going in terms of calls for service. And the chart that's up there now, the first chart shows actual calls for service. The other chart on the right shows the actual hours spent on service. And so you'll see there's an actual drop in emergency services. But in terms of the time that our officers spend at calls, it's actually gone up, and quite significantly. But this, again, I just want to stress, is just calls for service, emergency service, which is a big part of our business. But we do more than that. We investigate those calls, we investigate those crimes that come out of those calls, and we provide other services beyond. We have ETF, we have homicide, we have sex crimes. We ensure that we minimize the exploitation of children. Those are all services that we provide. But what we're finding, though, through inquests or policies that have been developed over time, and also as risk management, as a result of risk management initiatives, that while we have fewer calls, the type of calls that we're dealing with are changing, and we're actually spending more time on calls. So domestic calls now require 2 officers, and much more time on those calls. If you look at crime trends, as I indicated before, major crime was decreasing right across North America from 2005 to 2015. I think it went down about 25%. What we're seeing now in 2016 is a trend that's going the other way. If you look at homicides, we've had, now 55 so far this year. We had 40 at this time last year, and we had 56 in all of 2015. Sexual violation, we've had 1,720 this year, and we had 2,297 in all of 2015. Assaults, they've gone up. Shooting events, and this is one that's, I think, certainly has captured our attention. We've had 330 shootings so far this year. That's 53% more than we had at the same time last year. And already, we're significantly ahead of where we were at in all of 2015. And then when you look at the people side of it, the victims of these shootings, we've had 464 so far this year, 38% over the same period last year. And again, we've had more people victimized by shooting this year than we had all of last year. So we're moving to a new service delivery model, and the transformational task force and the activities and the implementation of some of the recommendations that come out of that task force will allow us to prioritize needs and be flexible in the deployment of our resources. We want to become more. We already are community-centric. We want to be more community-centric and actually work with the public in partnership to keep our community safe, to work with the various city agencies to keep our community safe. We want to deliver services, and this is at the forefront, in a responsible, affordable, and value-added and sustainable way. We want to plan for a rapid, highly effective priority response that's focused on where the immediate response is necessary. And we want to start using technology more to ensure that the officers that we have are connected and have the information, whether they're on a horse, in a car, on foot, or on a bike. When we talk about staffing, we also have civilians. And I think in this organization, and policing organizations in general, civilians extend to more than just your administrative and policy and management staff. 40% of our civilians are involved as communication operators and court security officers. We have people in property and evidence. We have people in records management who work 24/7 and records management in our business means occurrences, events that people and our officers respond to. And if you look at this chart, the red line is what our normal gapping is. Gapping is basically takes into account that it's going to take some time to actually fill a position. And so normally that we estimated that would take about 6 months, and so our percentage was about 4.9%. In order now to basically reduce our costs over the last number of years, we've actually increased that gapping rate to 8% and then 8.7%, and in 2017 we're going to be going up to 11%. And from where I sit and what I see, this is an area that concerns me because our ability to sustain this over the longer term will be very much challenged as civilians leave because we don't get to choose who leaves. And so we have this on our radar in terms of making sure that this moratorium is done in a managed and responsible way and doesn't actually result in errors and omissions and things that we really don't want to see happen, or that we have to reduce our service levels or not meet legislative requirements. So we're keeping our eye on that one. Our budget reflects over $28 million in savings, both through moratoriums as well as the $2 million in premium pays. And so people say, well, can you save more? We're doing this through voluntary exits. And so we're assuming that 160 people, uniformed officers, are going to leave in 2017 and 60 civilians. The only way you can achieve more savings on the uniform and civilian side is to actually exit more than volunteer to leave. So 89% of our budget was staffing. The other 11% is made up of reserve contributions and non-salary or other costs. It represents 7% of our about $121 million. And so reserve contributions, these are contributions that we make to various reserves in order to meet certain obligations. And if you look at, our reserve contributions total almost $40 million, and they represent 3.5% of our budget. If you look at the bottom there, the sick pay gratuity, the legal indemnification, the central sick bank, and healthcare spending, those are all reserves that are driven by the collective agreement. We are obligated to pay those things as negotiated in the collective agreement. The insurance reserve, which is $10 million, is a number that the city gives us, and it's based on our experience, and we certainly work with the city to try to keep that number as low as possible. So the one that we have the most control over is the vehicle and equipment reserve. And that is a reserve that allows us to fund and replace both our fleet as well as our information technology assets. And we've done everything that we can to extend the life of those assets. I indicated before, we've actually reduced some of those assets by cutting the number of cars by 104. So that's the one reserve that we think right now is in a bit of jeopardy, and we have to make sure that we can actually meet the needs of that equipment moving forward. So what's left? So you've got about another $81 million, or 4% of our budget, that's required to clean, heat, and light our facilities. We spend about $20 million on there. IT computer maintenance is very expensive. As we invest more in technology, that number will probably go up and we're looking at ways to try to mitigate and contain that cost. But that's another $17 million, and that's part. We rely on information, we need systems, and so that is a cost of doing business. About another quarter are for transportation costs. We've got to put gas in our vehicles. We need to keep those vehicles on the road, so there's parts that are required. You've got communication costs, and when I talk about communication costs, these are telephone lines and networks and that cost us $4.5 million. By moving to voice over internet protocol, we've actually been able to reduce that by $1.5 million over the last 2 years. And there's another 7.5 for contracted services, legal indemnification, which again is collectively bargained. And then the remaining 19% or $15 million is basically for just day-to-day business expenses that we need to cover. And again, a lot of those expenses, like clothing reimbursement, contract cleaning of our uniforms, are required by the collective agreement. Overall budget trend, the blue line represents our budget and how it's increased and moved up since 2006 to the current request, which is just over $1 billion. The red line is what that budget would be if we didn't have collective agreement raises. So our budget's increased by $250 million since 2006. $254 million, or 102% of that, is a result of collective agreement raises and other benefit provisions that have been negotiated. So we've actually saved close to $4 million on the non-COLA side to offset that 254, and the result is the 250. So in the last 10 years, we've actually reduced our budget through non-hiring and the reduction of non-salary costs by $4 million. This chart gives you, I find, a very interesting picture in terms of our budget increase history. And you see the first 5 years, our budget was in and around 4 to 4.5% increase. The purple line represents the collective agreement impact. And in those years, collective agreements impact were anywhere close to, averaged around 2.5 to 3%. And so you can see the increases there were in the fours. In 2012, we started looking at cost containment initiatives to help the city manage some of the fiscal challenges that it was facing. And so you'll see that from 2012 to 2016, our budget, the average increase in our budget was 1.6%. We came close to zero in 2013, but 2017 is the first year in recent memory that certainly we've gone below zero. And that below zero is not just $2 million below zero, but we had to find $50 million to basically get that. What we also saved over that 2012 was $42 million. And so you see the blue, those are savings. They're below the line. They're zero. And so we decreased and contained costs to the tune of $42 million in those years. Our increase in the last, from 12 to 16, is 1.6%. That's our total increase, including COLA, as well as non-salary dollars. The CPI average increase during that period was at 1.7%, so we're below the CPI. We can't look at the budget just in terms of 1 year. We have to look at it in terms of multi-years. And so this chart basically shows you that in 2017, we will be coming in below zero at minus $2 million. 2018, we forecast a pressure of $2.5 million, and then a further pressure in 2019 of 13.9. And you'll have to remember that there's pressures like salary settlements that continue as we move forward during the year. So these numbers are based on what we know today and will very likely change in the future. So in summary, our 2000 operating budget request is below zero. We came in $2 million or 0.2% below zero, the first time in recent memory that we've actually been able to do that. In order to achieve that, we actually had to find $40 million, over $40 million in pressures that we had identified going into this budget process. And we also, and then those were the result of significant reduction in staffing as aggressive line-by-line reductions. Going forward, our plan is still to modernize. We aren't finished, but it takes time, and it will take some money. So these changes won't happen overnight, but our goal is to further improve and enhance the delivery of community safety and public safety services over the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. And that concludes my part of the presentation on the operating budget request. Mr. Chair, I'll leave it up to you if you want to open up to questions now or if you want to hear the other two presentations.
Thank you. And I think we're going to follow a format of hearing from any deputants that are here after
Did
your
you want us to do the other
presentation.
ones first? Before the
fund?
deputants? There's the capital and the parking?
You want to go on to capital?
Up-
So I think we're going to follow the,
Okay.
each presentation and then deputation. Okay, on the item 9 deputation, we do have Margaret Bear. Is Margaret here? But they do have a written deputation from the Toronto Police Accountability Collusion. So it's a written deputation. So the next deputant would be Chris Langenfield. Thank you, Chris. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. I highlight the fact that in the budget, in the presentation there, we talk about the starting point is the 2016 budget figures, and then the fact that there's in fact $6 million carried over that was a surplus from the 2016 that's carried over to help go into reserves this year. And so in fact, I would say that's adding $12 million right off the bottom line to the 2017 budget, that it's already not only overstated in last year's, but overstated in the starting point for this year's budget. I also point out that part of where the funds are being made up for the 2017 budget is the elimination of lifeguard services and school crossing guards, but of course the city is still paying for those in other places, so that's not really an overall savings to taxpayers. It may reduce the services budget, but it doesn't help taxpayers all that much. So one would actually hope that the services budget would be going down even beyond that. In talking at the budget subcommittee meeting, one of the questions that was raised was whether or not the board could sort of direct where the staffing should be cut and in which divisions and which areas and things like that. And the response from the chair at that point was generally that, well, that's a decision for the chief to make. But I would suggest that if you refer to Section 31 of the Police Services Act, it is in fact the board that sets the, under 31(1)B, generally determine after consultation with the chief of police objectives and priorities with respect to police services in the municipality. So in fact, it is for the board to say what you believe the priorities are and where you think increases or decreases in specific areas should occur. And I would suggest that as you go through the budget, there are certainly some things that could be discussed. And those discussions simply don't seem to happen. The standard response seems to be, well, that's for the service to decide. In looking through the 4-page detailed request of the budget, there are a few items. There is standby pay, and I've given copies of this to Deirdre, and there's $250,000 for standby pay for civilians under the collective agreement who are requested by their unit commander or supervisor to be on standby for emergency purposes. And so I simply ask, well, what were the emergency situations in last year, in 2016, that ended up requiring $250,000 worth of civilians to stay on and work? Personally, I think we look at emergencies and we think of that as being something more than just we had a reason for them to be there. When you look at gasoline expenses in the budget, in fact, to year-to-date to the end of August, it's $4 million. They project that to the 2016 projected total year as $7.5 million, but that's in fact a lot more than if you take 12/8 of what's been spent up to the end of August. That's in excess of about $1.3 million. And so it seems like, in fact, that particular line has what I would call a fudge factor built in, that there's an extra $1 million or so. And of course, we all know that the service is involved with the city's procurement and is part of the contract where they negotiated collective fees to purchase gasoline, and in fact, our costs were higher over the recent year and a half that gasoline prices dropped so dramatically. We were actually paying more because, of course, we had already signed an agreement. One would expect that now we should be seeing some benefits from that as prices go up. Looking at tuition fees, they're up $200,000. At the same time, in the budget request, they say there's been a 5% reduction across the board for courses, seminars, and conferences. So it seems that one number's going up while another number's going down. And so all in all, I guess I'm saying that the overall amount of the budget here, although there are some reductions, they tend to be these major things that we know of, the lifeguards, the crossing guards, things like that are simply being removed from the service's scope and they don't need to worry about. I would suggest that what the city has asked for, the flat 2.6% reduction from previous year's budget, should in fact be doable, and that it comes back. We look at last year when the city made its request, its original request in October. The board asked for a reduction. The service came back and came up with a reduced budget. The board approved that. That went to the city. The city cut that budget again, and that's what was given to the service. And now they're still saying, well, there was a surplus, albeit a small one, over that. So I think it's simply a case of when you're talking about $1 billion, you have to simply cut the numbers and see if you're actually running into shortfalls. We know that there was money found for C8s last year that wasn't a specific line item. There have been a lot of other things where,
Please wrap up.
okay, where the funding has come up. So I would call on the board to simply cut the 2.6% that the city has asked, cut that from the 2016 budget total, and let's go with that, and I think we'll find that the service is able to actually achieve that. I also included there a slightly enhanced format of what I think we need in the budget requests that we're getting, with a breakdown of what ended up being the 483 pages of the full budget that came out at the budget subcommittee hearing. So I've given Deirdre a copy, Mr. Viziano, I'll just give you a copy of that, and maybe that'll help in future years, but I hope for this year you will still cut what the asking is. Thank you.
Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Langenfield. Next speaker is Miguel Avila. Mr. Avila, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with Chris and most of the items, much of the points he raised today. I totally support that. And just want to say, to open up my deputation, is that today I want to say there are two important items that cares at City Hall. Is one that the Toronto Prosperity, the so-called poverty reduction strategy, we talk too much. It's not my creation, it's the creation of my deputy mayor, Pam McConnell, who wants to see the reduction of poverty. And the other one is that, Mr. Mayor, you want to create a housing fund for everybody in the city of Toronto. Wonderful. So these are the main items that, concern. But however, every time we come to the board and talk about the money for the police, no problem, no deals. No, so I want you to educate your board members on the word no more money. When you come to vote, you say no more money. Because last year, 2016, you promised to cut. But, because of the collective agreement, you had to have more money to pay for the unions, the members of the union, the collective agreement, $52 million, I believe. So that passed it in City Council so quickly. Nobody asked the question, except for Councilor Michael Thompson, I believe, He's the only one who has stood up to ask the questions that need to be asked. So I'm going to educate my members of this community, Councilor Chinley, Mayor Tory, Councilor, the other councilor, please, no more money. Please say yes to housing. Please say yes to health, childcare. Say yes to good jobs in Toronto. I expressed my concerns about the paid duty cars. Last meeting at a subcommittee meeting, I said there are 14 vehicles currently used by sergeants or other officers during off-duty to drive around city, and I wonder if the number of vehicles is going to be taken off the wish list, because we are just it doesn't explain the number of vehicles that are going to be taken off the road. Another thing I want to say is, and this is a pause, to answer the question of Councilor Monier, Ms. Monier, is that anything that you want to do with the cameras is contingent to the consultations that are taking place in the province of Ontario for the Police Act and other civil accountability agencies that review the police forces in Ontario. So if we even have cameras right now, the results will not lead into termination. Even if you go high tech and hiring consultants to get the best camera, the results will not ended up in terminations of employment. The union will put up a fight, and I'm sure that the union will tell their members, turn off your camera, because this will lead you to your termination of employment. Another thing I just want to say that on the subcommittee meeting, Doreen mentioned that there is no line for the lawsuits. We don't know how much money the cities, you and the board, is allocating for lawsuits. We want to know how much money of the budget is dedicated for lawsuits. So that information is important for Torontonians to know before you guys make a decision. And again, I need to educate you. No more money 2017. We need to make priority to what is really important, good jobs. Put an end to the practice of pay duty, which is really an absurd reality. And I mentioned to members attending the housing forum, we need to create better jobs. I expressed my concerns to Deputy Mayor, Councilor Pam McConnell. We should be starting hiring unemployed young adults and young members of the community who are working right now for $10 an hour at Tim Hortons and in all these places that really doesn't give you a value, doesn't teach you or really support your family. So I wish that the board can understand that we have a problem of unemployment, and perhaps those good jobs of $65 an hour can be better put to use to help the community. And I think it's over, right? 5 minutes? Is my time done?
Yeah. It's coming
Okay,
up.
thank you so much.
Okay.
I'll be glad to answer any question now.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to ask. Any questions of Mr. Villa? Seeing none, I will now follow the format suggested. Is any questions of staff from the board members? Seeing none, anybody to speak? Mayor Tory, go ahead.
Chair, thank you. I have two motions. I presume the procedure we follow here is similar to at City Council, where you have to indicate that at the outset, and maybe we could put, these are both to do with the operating budget. Maybe we could put the first one up. And just while we're waiting for that, the first one deals with a transitional arrangement to make sure people are not concerned that the transfer of responsibility for the lifeguard and school crossing programs will leave anybody in the lurch. And it simply says what it says there, which is that we would continue to operate, the chief of police would continue to operate these programs for a transition period of up to 1 year, not later than July 1st of 2018, to allow the transfer of these programs to the appropriate responsible body for the 18-19 school year. and that the board requests the city to fund the programs during the transition period from non-program revenue, and then ultimately the cost and revenue would be transferred to the budget of the responsible body to be determined by the city and resulting from consultation between the city manager and the chief of police. And this really is just as it seems, is a sensible interim arrangement to make sure that while we sort out who will have responsibility for this, given the Transformation Task Force has suggested correctly, I believe, that the police service should not, that there will be service maintained and that we will have arrangements to have this go forward. The second motion relates to the matter of the grants from the provincial government. I think it is a perverse result to have the Police Services Board of this city or any other community in the province going about its job trying to transform policing and find that in the process they're penalized, in effect, by the setup, the structure of the provincial funding programs that we have come to rely upon. And so the reason that you see the grants going down this year from the province and taken into account in the budget is because we have been doing our job and trying to find ways in which to civilianize and do other things to rationalize the size of the police service. And so I have been making representations to the government at the highest levels, as have others, but this is a motion that simply reiterates that the board has, in the follow-up to this budget, requested that I continue to follow up with the government of Ontario, and in particular with the Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, with the goal, as it says in the motion, of achieving full funding for these grant programs. And it discusses the fact that if we're successful in, as I believe we should be, in having the province treat us fairly, and to encourage us to continue the process of modernizing policing, that we would take the benefits of those discussions and apply them to a further reduction of the 2017 budget. So those are the two motions. And I will just say, with respect to the budget in general, there's been lots of discussion, and I want to thank the members of the Budget Subcommittee and the staff of the Police Service and the members of the Police Service, up to the Chief, for their work on this, and to say two things. Number one, this is the first in the last 11 budgets, that actually shows a reduction in the police budget. And as Mr. Venziano said, this is a work in progress as we continue to implement in a careful, responsible manner the modernization task force, transformation task force recommendations. We will see the further benefits of that in terms of not just better policing that's closer to the community, but also some financial benefits that will continue to flow. And we will look forward to the continuation of this trend line in terms of a reducing police budget. But it is the first budget in 11 budgets, and probably going back, it may be the first ever, that has actually shown a reduction in the expenditure. And secondly, that the effort that's been put in by the police chief and the service and the budget subcommittee and the board has resulted in an expenditure reduction of some $47 million, which is a very significant number in the context of where we started, especially given that in this case, the mandated salary increase mandated by a collective agreement that was entered into, and they're quite modest, but nonetheless they amount to a fairly significant amount of money. And by having the hiring moratorium and the promotion moratorium, we've managed to offset that. And so I just want to say that I think that is good progress. We have more to do, but I think it represents a very significant departure from past practice in terms of what we see here. Again, the first in 11 budgets that has shown, and maybe the first budget ever to show a reduction in the money on a year-over-year basis, 2017 over 2016. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, you have comments? You're good? Okay, anybody else have anything to say? Yes, Ms. Molnar.
I'm thinking ahead to the 2018 budget process, and I'm very mindful that this is the first year that we have been able to be this transparent. The timelines weren't necessarily as long as some members of the public would have liked in terms of being able to review materials beforehand, and I appreciate that. And I'm wondering whether, having gotten us here today, and perhaps this is a question for you or a question for the chief, Tony, whether you can see a way to have more public participation in the budgetary process earlier on.
Probably, we're all for public consultation, and certainly would like to do, and certainly this year, we actually made our preliminary request public, right? So we want to build on that. I think Mr. Langenfeld's little chart that he gave me here actually is something that we can work with in terms of providing the public with information that perhaps isn't overly onerous in terms of how much information we provide, but actually gives them the information that they need in order to provide feedback. We're part of a process, and so trying to get that needs to meet certain city deadlines and requirements. So it's going to be difficult to try to have a lot of consultation at different points. What I can commit to is that we will look at that process, and certainly where if we can build in a couple of other touch points, perhaps earlier on in the process, certainly we'll do that.
So without putting you on the spot, which I will do perhaps more gently than you might expect, when might you be able to give us a sense? Because it's October now. The budget subcommittee work started in June of this year, I think.
Actually, September.
September. So when would be the earliest next year, 2017, you could imagine coming back with what I'll call an outline of how there could be more public participation, which is not necessarily the same as consultation, but we can quibble around that later. When could you come back with an outline of how we could, what we could expect to see as an enhanced public participation model?
So I'm going to answer it this way. I really don't want to commit at this time. I'd like the opportunity to give this a little bit more thought, talk to the city, talk with my own people, discuss it with the chief, but we'll commit to perhaps bringing forward a process earlier on, even next year, in terms of what process we will follow that will contain certain checkpoints in terms of public consultation in that. So if you want to put it forward as a motion, otherwise I'll certainly commit to doing that and providing you that information early in 2017.
I'm prepared to accept your commitment, and I will be asking the question in January of 2017, just to give you a heads up. And in that vein, similar to my request earlier to the executive director for a placeholder in our public agenda for materials related to certain items, I think that we have excellent materials. The ones that were presented today, I'm not sure were available to us. So could we have all of the materials for the 2017 budget as a tab? I can't remember what the language was they used, a
No,
tab,
there is a separate tab already for the 2017
for the
budget.
public agenda,
But certainly if we have these PowerPoints electronically, we can add those.
including the submissions that we have received from, the written submissions from members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And anybody else to speak? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is Mayor Tory's, and number 4 incorporates the recommendations from the chief. So all those, I'm going to second Mayor Tory's motions. All 4 at once, yeah. Right, all 4 motions. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. So we then go to the next item. I think the, you want to do number 10 first? Number 10. Okay. Unless you want to go 11, okay. Because of deputations, we jump to number 11. For the Toronto Police Service 2017 to 2026 capital program request. So, Tony, can you please do number 11 first?
So I'm going to turn it over to Sandra Calafretti. I will assure the board that these presentations will be much shorter than mine was. So Sandra will
Thank
take
you.
us through
I
capital.
don't know about that. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am not a technical person, as you can tell. We're good? Oh, okay, there we go. Oops. Sorry, we have parking up next. Okay. All right, good afternoon. I'm going to speak to you about our 2017 to 2026 capital program. So just to tell you a little bit about the strategic direction that we've taken. In light of the task force recommendations and the need to modernize the organization, we're starting to look forward to make capital investments that actually modernize the Toronto Police Service. So this capital program, just like the operating budget, is actually going to be transitional. What you'll see is that we are maintaining our current assets because there is a need to maintain those current assets in our current operations. But what we're also doing is we're also looking at our facilities and placement of those facilities. So we're maintaining those facilities, but we're going to be looking at where we put those facilities in a very different way. And we're also looking at expanding on our information technology requirements so that we can actually make our officers more connected to crime information, to neighborhood information, as well as some internal information that we think would be valuable in the performance of their duties. So our request for funds is going to incorporate all three of those elements. So the objectives in our capital program, we actually have 4 objectives. We want to connect our members to being more accessible and to having more accessible information and having more transparent information. We want to optimize the location of our facilities, but we also want to reduce our facilities footprint. We want to increase efficiencies in operations by providing integrated platforms. And we also want to continue with the maintenance of our current inventory of assets. So while we are transforming, we are still providing police services, and as a result, we need to maintain the equipment that we have. So through our facilities realignment and increased information, the service will actually be where the public needs us most and will actually have the information that they need to more effectively serve the public. So our capital program consists of 3 funding sources. We receive debt funding from the City of Toronto. The city provides us with a 10-year debt affordability target, and the goal of our program and a goal that we've achieved is to actually, on average, meet that debt target over the 10 years. We also have access to development charges, which are available for infrastructure projects like our facilities projects and our facilities realignment. And as Tony mentioned earlier, we have a vehicle and equipment reserve, which we fund through contributions from the operating budget. That reserve is a really important part of the funding that's available to the service. It actually funds all of our life cycle replacements. So the more technology that we provide, the more equipment that we have for our officers to conduct their work, for the service to do its work, the more funds that are needed in that reserve to be able to replace those pieces of equipment and those articles. And technology is not cheap. So our total program value is $531.2 million. 47% of it is spent on life cycle replacements that are funded from our reserve, and 53% of it is spent on ongoing and new projects that are funded from debt and development charges, with 44% of our program being funded from debt. So you can see that if the reserves start to run out, a lot more of our program will need to be funded from debt, which will impair our ability to actually do some of the projects and make some of the investments that we wish and need to make. So just to take you through the 2017 request, our gross request for 2017 is $46.3 million, and that consists of a number of ongoing projects, as well as two new projects that we want to begin in 2017, and about $22 million worth of life cycle replacements. Funding for that gross request comes from both the vehicle and equipment reserve and developmental charges to the tune of $27.3 million. So our request, which is debt funding for 2017, is actually $18.9 million. The city's target for this year was $21.4 million, so we came slightly below that target for the year, but this is all based on cash flows. On average, we actually meet the target that the city has given us for 10 years, and I'll show you a little bit later how that actually works out. So for 2017, what we're looking at is 89% of the budget actually funding state of good repair. But what we've included in state of good repair is actually new facilities. which, as mentioned earlier, will actually be strategically replaced in communities. And 11% is what's moving us towards a more information-based and connected organization. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of our projects that have been ongoing, were started in prior programs and approved as part of prior programs. The projects in progress that are moving forward to 2017 are worth about, our funding is worth about $22.7 million. All right, so our Transforming Corporate Support project is actually a continuation of work that we've been doing on our two major human resource management systems, one being our PeopleSoft HRMS and payroll system, and the other being our Infor timekeeping system. So we actually have a vision for this project. What we want to do is we want to optimize how internal service members actually perform their work in support of the service and service members. We're actually looking at modernizing and standardizing business processes, and that will achieve efficiencies, and it will also bring us more towards best practices. And we also want to optimize technology that's owned by the service, and that's going to be providing our members and our managers with better information through enhanced self-service and enhanced dashboards. So we have a 4-year blueprint for this project that would basically modernize the delivery of internal services and consolidate these two systems into one service-wide system that would manage end-to-end human resource information. Stage 1 is actually almost complete with an upgrade of our human resource management system, as well as significant changes to our recruitment and training administration processes and systems, which will actually bring tremendous efficiencies, both within Corporate Services Command, but also out in the field. And Stage 2 is actually set to begin in January, provided approval is received, where we're actually going to be reconfiguring the core system, the core of the system, so that we can enhance data integrity and then begin the consolidation of our timekeeping system in with our payroll HR management system. Our facilities realignment is actually a project that was an initiative through the Transformational Task Force. So previously, individual facilities were replaced or renovated based on life cycle expectations. This project represents a transition to a new way of thinking about how facilities look, where we place facilities in the organization. So what we're doing is we're going to be working with the Transformational Task Force, or through their recommendations, to look at the placement of facilities that is going to be more in line with a different service delivery model, a different way of thinking about what a facility is, making it more community-centric and really being at the core of the community. The starting point for that is going to be the consolidation of 54 and 55 division. So our goal for this project is going to be that strategic alignment and of divisions and the placement, the reduction of facilities in the organization, so we can actually give redundant facilities back to the City of Toronto. And through that, we're going to be reducing our operating and longer-term replacement costs. So what you'll see in the 2018 to 2027 capital program is actually a more detailed plan with respect to what facilities realignment is going to look like once we receive the final recommendations and an implementation plan is developed. So there's two projects that are set to begin in 2017. I'll just go over those two projects in detail. So conducted energy weapons, or CEWs, are handheld, less lethal weapons that were initially piloted in the service in 2002 and expanded or used by tactical teams or deployed to tactical teams and frontline supervisors. What they provide is a less lethal option to police officers in order to be able to provide less injurious use of force. We currently have an inventory of 545 CEWs in the organization. In 2013, the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services authorized the expanded use of CEWs to non-supervisory police personnel in Ontario. And since that time, they've amended the guidelines, but only to the extent that they've increased the training time. So they've not changed their position in terms of who these CEWs can be deployed to. The service actually believes that through proper policy, procedures, training, and accountability, the CEW is an appropriate use of force option that can help in public safety and officer safety matters. And for this reason, our program requests $750,000 to be able to deploy and train for an additional 250 CEWs. Just like with all other projects, we certainly plan on doing our due diligence with this project before any procurement decision is made. And body-worn cameras, I won't go into any detail, but as you heard from the earlier agenda item, that we have put a request for $500,000 in our program to be able to fund procurement and technical expertise for the continued work on this project. So we have one project that right now is below the line, as we call it, but we will be working with City Finance to actually get it into our program. Right now, we call it below the line because we have not actually incorporated it into our program, but we will be working with them to do that. So what this is additional funding to provide enhanced digital technology for handheld devices that are used by parking enforcement officers. Those devices will be in support of the City Council initiative that was approved in July of this year for an administrative penalty system for parking violations. So essentially, the initiative will take parking tags out of the court judicial process. The handheld devices, funding to replace those handheld devices whose life cycle is up at this point, is provided in the Vehicle and Equipment Reserve. So we have about $2.9 million available in that reserve to fund just the original handheld device. The startup costs associated with this, the digital technology that would be used for evidentiary purposes is actually about $2.2 million, and there's another $400,000 or so for the replacement of tag books. So right now, this project is below the line, but is an increment or an important part of what our parking enforcement officers do, and as a result, we will be working with the city for that project. So a future project is actually a very exciting initiative that's come out of the task force. It's the concept of the connected officer. So it's an investment. Right now, we don't know what the costs associated with this project look like because we have just initiated the analysis and the research on fine-tuning what this is actually going to come down to in terms of what our officers are holding. But it's really a movement from what the officers currently have in terms of the mobile workstation that's in their car to smart devices that they're carrying. Those smart devices, the concept is that they will carry a full suite, a full application suite, as well as an e-notebook, as well as some of the existing applications that exist in the mobile environment itself. The connected officer will basically ensure that officers are connected at all times to current operational information, crime trend information, any news and information that's available in their neighborhoods, as well as some of the internal self-service and internal dashboards that we're going to be rolling out. So at this point, this is a future project. There's no quantifiable factors that can be considered, but we certainly wanted to make the board aware that it will be coming soon to the capital program. All right, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of information on our Vehicle and Equipment Reserve. So we have a lot of projects that are funded, replacements that are funded out of our Vehicle and Equipment Reserve. Every time we add a new piece of equipment, we actually factor in what the life cycle is going to be for that equipment, and we factor in an operating cost to be able to fund the reserve so that we have money available when the time comes. So when we have to replace a new car, we draw from that reserve. So it's really important to ensure that funding is available in that reserve when the time comes to replace that equipment. So right now, the next 10 years, we have $464 million worth of equipment that must be life cycled, that will be life cycled, and that needs to be funded from this Vehicle and Equipment Reserve. We did some work in 2016 to reduce the pressure on that reserve. So we reduced 104 vehicles out of our fleet. 24 of them were marked vehicles and 80 were unmarked vehicles. And the impact that that had is we've actually permanently reduced the draw from the reserve by $600,000. But it's really important to remember that every time we do add a piece of technology or add an extra piece of equipment, we do impact that reserve. So it's extremely important to keep the contributions into that bank account. So I'll just give you a quick summary of our projects. That slide is really busy, a lot of information. So our program, as I said earlier, is valued at $531.2 million. Our program will enhance where officers work in communities, enhance the information that they have available, but it also allows us to continue to replace and maintain the current asset inventory that we use on a regular basis to provide policing services. The program itself will have $232.5 million coming from debt funding, and we have reached the city's debt affordability target over the 10 years of the program. And $251.6 million will be funded through the Services Vehicle and Equipment Reserve. So that's it. That's the end. Yeah, that concludes the capital program.
Thank you. And any deputants? Deputant is Chris Engenfeld. Right. Okay. You have 5 minutes again. Thank you.
On this, I'm just going to address, there were two issues. This has the $500,000 that you've already approved for the body-worn cameras, and it has $750,000 for conducted energy weapons, and so that's what I'm going to address here. You'll no doubt remember, and I've given Deirdre copies of the November 2013 minutes P259 and 260, when the board actually considered the expansion of conducted energy weapons to the service. That was after the province redefined the legislation in that regard. And in that case, on minute P259 from the November 7th, 2013 meeting, the board approved the following motions. Number 3, that the board direct the chief not to proceed with the expanded development of CEWs as outlined in his report at this time. And on item P260, which was the submission from community members of the board's mental health subcommittee, that the board subsequently directed the chief not to proceed with the expanded deployment of CEWs at this time. And in the mental health subcommittee's report, they actually recommended, in concert with the overwhelming negative response heard at the public consultation meeting on CEW expansion held on September 24, 2013, the community members of the Mental Health Subcommittee strongly recommend that the board not approve the wider distribution of CEWs at this time. So I think it's certainly come up many times. Those of you that were here back in 2013 when this was dealt with by the board will remember, in fact, the members of the public applauding the decision of the board not to expand that, and that's the only time I've heard that large an outbreak of applause here. That they were, thank you, Miguel, that they were that happy to see that that's not happening. There's certainly lots of concerns I've also provided Deirdre with copies of a number of Toronto or newspaper articles. One is a Toronto Star article that speaks of a 2010 situation when John Sewell was faced with an officer charging up at him with tasers drawn against him and another person who happened to be a client that he was representing as a lawyer at that point. There's the two articles there regarding the situation in 2010, May 2010, when a constable with the service who was an acting sergeant, and so at that point he had a conducted energy weapon, was videotaped on his in-car camera having threatened one person in handcuffs with tasering him in the groin and another person with tasering him in the neck. And he was later acquitted on the basis that he had a low blood sugar, and that apparently that made it okay, or I certainly understand that that's an extenuating circumstance, but it shows the danger of expanding these weapons throughout the service. The problem is that they're not subject to the same controls that the firearms are. We don't have the situation where, as with the use of force reports, when an officer draws their weapon, they're required to submit a use of force report. But we know that they can draw their CEW and threaten people, and that isn't the same case unless I believe they're using it in applied force mode or something, where they're displaying the sparks but not actually applying it against the person. But if they simply pull it from its holster and aim it at the person, that isn't included in a report anywhere. And this becomes a weapon that I think members of the public are concerned that they're going to be threatened with something that is viewed as a non-lethal option, but nonetheless an extremely painful and dangerous thing for members of the public. And you look back to 2007 when in Vancouver, Mr. Robert Dzansky, anyway, was killed in the airport. The Polish immigrant who you'll recall was killed after being tasered by 5 RCMP officers, and that in 2013 that death was ruled to be a homicide by their coroner, and in 2015 one of the officers there was found to be in the wrong in a disciplinary hearing, and yet, as I've given a copy of the article, he still feels he did nothing wrong because, according to him, he acted in accordance with his training from the service, from the RCMP, in the use of this. And I think that's the problem, that notwithstanding that in many cases this is obviously a less lethal weapon, it is nonetheless very dangerous, and it puts people at a risk of feeling threatened by police officers. And that's why I think that this, while I think it's a wonderful weapon and police should have it, I think they should only have it after they have body-worn cameras. I think that the cameras protect everybody in the environment, that we have a record of when the weapons are deployed. And so I think it's disturbing that we have the we're having funding approved to discuss more body-worn cameras so that maybe in another year or two those will be introduced, but nonetheless we're putting in $750,000 into the budget now that is going to be approved for them to actually go out and buy these weapons. And I acknowledge that it's been said that, well, this will come up again nonetheless for a public time.
5 minutes.
Okay, that there will be a public discussion, but I think that even so, that the funding for this should not be approved. First of all, shouldn't be approved until after that public discussion has happened, and I would suggest that it's appropriate to put it off till next year's budget, that should be stricken from the 2017 budget, which will give us a time during this year to discuss that, look at where we're going with body-worn cameras, and then consider the expansion of tasers in next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay. Any questions of the presenters, staff? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Carroll.
So I have a couple of questions, and one is to cover off on the CEW placeholder. But I wanted to ask about vehicles too, because we sort of ran out of time, the Budget Committee. During the 2016 budget year was the first time that the community started to see the ghost cars on the scene, the different painting of police cars. And we got sort of we got an answer to sort of initial inquiries when they appeared on the street, and there was feedback mostly to councillors over at City Hall. What are these cars? Where did they come from? So I'm wondering, we heard, well, we're not replacing the whole fleet, but my question is, how many vehicles are we building into the capital budget for 2017? And are any of those ghost cars? Do we need to differentiate that we want to have that conversation at the board?
If you could clarify when you define ghost cars.
Well, that's sort of the nickname the kids are using on social media. The new cars that look like they've been painted with the red, white, and blue, but then they've got the overlay of gray, so you can, at night it's hard to see the logo on the car.
Yeah, we in our existing fleet, we have what are called stealth cars that are used for the traffic enforcement, and we still, with the new vehicles, will have stealth cars because there's a necessity for it, especially when you deal with offenses such as distraction driving and things along those lines. The regularly marked police cars are not stealth cars, and they're clearly visible with the white fluorescent insignia on all four sides of the vehicle.
Right. So there are some purposes for them, but there isn't an intention to turn over over time to turn over the entire fleet to the stealth cars. Is that the case?
No, stealth cars, no. And that's why I asked you to delineate. The stealth cars are the ones that don't have the same, the white fluorescent.
Right. I know what they are. And I know that on social media, the young cats are calling them ghost cars. Stealth cars, ghost cars. How many are there? And how many more are we buying? And are we buying any in 2017? Is the question.
Okay. I don't know how many stealth cars we have, but the fleet cars will be converted to the gray with all white fluorescent insignia.
So they are all going to be converted?
The marked cars, yes.
So that is, if they're all going to be converted, then I actually do have an issue with buying more vehicles this year. And I know that it hampers you if we don't, but it has bubbled up from the community that they are concerned that we have made a major change in the profile of our service without ever discussing it here. So there wasn't ever a moment of public input on it.
I don't recall. No, there was no public input other than the fact that I had put a couple of them out in 23 Division and asked for a response on it, and the feedback was positive by and large that I was getting back concerning how they looked, and so from there I switched to make all of the marked cars gray with all white.
Okay, so 23 Division feedback, does that mean service feedback or community feedback?
It was community feedback.
Through the CPLC?
Through the unit commander. I'd asked the unit commander to put the car out, have a look, and see whether or not there was a positive response to the vehicles by the public and by the men and women, and to let me know. And then I was advised that the feedback was positive.
Okay, now I sound like I'm giving a hard time. So how did he gather that feedback?
By asking people, and by people talking to him.
Okay, so now I'm kind of confused, because when it hit the media, when they first came out in number and they first hit the media, I guess I misunderstood, because folks asked the chair, who unfortunately isn't here today, and I thought the answer was that we're not converting them all. they serve a purpose, but that we're not converting them all. I'm now hearing that we're just converting every car.
Well, that's why I asked you what you were defining as stealth cars. And what was happening was people were putting out pictures of the stealth cars and saying this is what all of the vehicles are going to look like, which is in fact incorrect.
Okay, so now I am wondering it. Now I'm very confused, and more importantly, I think the community is confused. And so I'm wondering if, while we're adopting the budget today, we don't want today to really make that item a placeholder and ask that it be presented. What is the future of the fleet of the service, and have that presented to us as soon as possible for information only item. But I think we need to present to the board, because we are making a major design change, and we did never discuss it. And I'm sure that at one point when we went from yellow to red, white, and blue, there was probably a conversation. Now we're going from that to something else. And it's a very small amount of conversation, and a conversation that did not involve the board. So I'm wondering, the budget still has yet to be adopted. I don't think I'm not going to stop the budget in its tracks, but I think today we need to add an additional motion asking for a presentation on what is the future of the design of our fleet.
I think it'd be a separate item, right, of request.
That's why
or
I'm
report
looking at you, Mr. Chair. I'm
Right.
wondering if it's in order attached to a budget item, or if you want me to move that as a standalone
I
item
think
of new
it'd be
business.
better if you move it as standalone, because I think
Okay.
it's a community concerns.
Yeah, because
So
I also
think
don't
we
want it
need
to feel tied to the
have
schedule.
an airing out on at the next meeting likely.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So that's your intention to bring that to the next meeting?
Okay.
Okay.
And then I had one other, just one other line of questioning. The CEWs, we heard the chief and Chair Pringle say at the budget subcommittee that the CEW item is a placeholder, and we had a presentation on it in the budget here that was more fleshed out. And we appreciate that. But is it still the intention that that placeholder that's in the budget doesn't preclude a full report back? I think we need a document that shows where that CEW request is coming from, because it's coming from, lauded commissions saying that we should do this. There's a case for it. Is that report still coming?
Yes, that is.
Okay, is it crystal clear in terms of the board as a whole that that report has to be processed through this board before a tender would go out for the increased supply? Oh, okay. So we're going to put it on record. So I have no more questions then. We can deal with it then. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions to speak, Mayor Tory?
Thank you. Just to speak briefly to this motion, I'll put that has to do with the capital budget, Mr. Chair. And the motion is up there, and it just says that the Chief of Police conduct community consultations, which will include the Board Mental Health Subcommittee, and report back prior to the procurement of any additional conducted energy weapons proposed to be deployed to selected frontline officers. And that is meant to encompass, obviously, a community consultation most particularly, and even as a subset of that, the Board Mental Health Subcommittee. But also, I would assume the report coming back will contain the information that Councillor Carroll just referred to, which is the background that led us to the point where, we're having this discussion at all. So I think it will. That report will come back, and we will deal with it at that time. And that'll be following the consultation that we've requested if we pass this motion.
Chief, you have something to add?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in order for me to expand on that, I need board approval. I'm aware of that, so I'm just wondering, is it the chief that should be conducting the community consultations, or should it be the board conducting the consultations?
For myself, Chief, I'm quite happy to amend it to it being the board, in the sense that the board as sponsor is the oversight body. And so in that sense, I think that's a valid question, and I'm glad you asked it. And I think we could, I'd be quite
Thank
happy
you very
to-
much for your suggestion. Friendly amendment.
That makes
Yeah, I think it does.
Because the original amount was approved by the board, so it's, in essence, it's board policy.
Right.
The current inventory.
So there we are, Chief. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And anybody else to speak to this? Yes.
I'm not sure if this is the right place to raise the relationship to body-worn cameras. So I was reading this motion, was going to suggest, but it might be mixing apples and oranges, although there's obviously a relationship, that the body-worn camera discussion be addressed in this meeting, and whether it can be part of this motion or not, I would defer to you, Mayor.
I understood what Mr. Langenfeld said, and I think what you're alluding to. I would myself, you're welcome to move. I would myself not tie the two. I think they're two separate but related items, and I would rather see this proceed and have a consultation and a report, and have that proceed, because I have a feeling, notwithstanding I understand what Mr. Langenfeld was saying, for example, this will come back. The RFP, Fairness Commissioner, technology examination, what do we call it, non-binding RFP will take some period of time. It just will. I think this can come back. And look, we can always decide when we get this report back, if it comes sooner, that we don't deal with it at that time, or we deal with it and approve it for later, or not approve it, whatever. So I would not tie the two together myself, and so I would just leave it as it is. But
So I'm fine with proceeding with this motion, and then we can come back to the body-worn camera issue. Thank you.
No, actually, this one here, if we approve this, that means we will be done with this item. So
And
do
I'd
you
like-
want to move anything else?
So can you remind me, Chair, where we are at on the body-worn camera issue? Is it coming back to this
Yes.
board for public consultation?
Right. Once they finish with the what we approve in terms of the non-binding RFP and all the other, they're going to come back with a report that basically itemizes all the costs. Because I also asked about the, all the administrative costs and so on as well. So that will include all that, and it will have to come back to this
Okay,
board.
thank you. So I'm fine to proceed with this
if
motion.
you'll indulge me, Mr. Chair, one other thing I meant to say when putting that motion was that I completely reject the notion, again, that's contained in the Accountability Coalition documentation. I've been through a lot of budgets in my day in the private and public sector, and the fact you put something in doesn't necessarily reflect the fact that you've approved doing it. But it is irresponsible not to put it in if you think you might do it. In other words, the budget is meant to kind of set out, the parameters of what you think you're going to be doing over the course of the year. And there's always lots of changes in that. And as we know, certainly in the city's budget, oftentimes there are projects that are in there that don't get done, either because it's decided they don't get done or they don't get done in time. And so I don't accept this notion that somehow today, again, I explicitly reject the notion, and this is meant to sort of say, we've got a big consultation to be held and discussions to be held about this, and that the impression people are trying to create that this is an approval of this expansion is not correct.
All right, so we have this, if there's no further speakers, then this motion is on the floor to be voted on. Councillor Carroll seconded.
Sure.
And all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And now we go back to the next presentation, which is number 10.
I have that vehicle motion ready if you want. It's not typed out though yet. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Simply that the chief report to the board on the current inventory of service vehicles according to design, and then an outline of what designs the chief intends to have in service over the next 5 years as per our capital plan. So we know how many of each type of vehicle are on the road now, and what's the vision of the service, what they want on the road 5 years from now.
So the motion is for the chief report back.
Right, but it's standalone, it's
Right,
not
it's
an
standalone, I
amendment to
agree,
the
okay?
item, yeah.
So it's an introduction of a new item for standalone report for the
Yeah.
chief to bring it back. Do we have a timeline, possibly?
I didn't put a timeline on so that
Okay.
it wouldn't be
So the chief can,
confused with
work on it as,
with
yeah, okay.
budget, but
Right.
I will be nagging.
Okay, thank you very much. And if that, everybody heard that, is that okay? So Councillor Carroll is moving it, Mayor Tory is seconding it, and all is in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. So the next item is Police Parking Enforcement Unit 2017 operating budget.
All right. So I'm just going to take you through the structure and responsibilities of our parking enforcement unit. So the Services Parking Enforcement Unit works in partnership with the larger City of Toronto Parking Authority to ensure the safe and orderly flow of traffic. Parking enforcement is responsible for enforcing the municipal bylaws, while the city has responsibility over revenue collection and the judicial process. So like the service, parking enforcement's greatest asset are its people. So the largest component of its budget are salaries and related costs. So revenues that are collected by the City of Toronto through the enforcement efforts of parking enforcement officers are impacted by a number of factors. City Council initiatives and any bylaw changes that are intended to enforce good behavior and ensure traffic flow actually impact revenues. There's increased fine initiatives, there's specialized programs such as the legal parking permit issuance, and then there's levels of enforcement, which actually have two components. One is compliance. So if people are following the rules, then the parking enforcement piece is easy. The other piece is staff deployment. So our parking enforcement group actually works quite diligently to ensure that staff are deployed to deliver the service where the areas of the city most need it. So they fully support the mayor's 6-point traffic program, and they ensure that there's adequate coverage during the coverage in rush hour routes, particularly in the downtown core. They focus their attentions on high traffic areas with strategic assignments at busy intersections and TTC routes. And they're also involved in a large number of calls for service. So, for example, in 2015, they actually responded to 149,000 parking-related calls for service. So in preparing the budget for parking enforcement, we actually went through the same exercise with that group as we did within the service. We started the process with an accumulation of the pressures. So the Parking Enforcement 2016 approved budget is $45.9 million. They had approximately $3.9 million of pressures. The large majority of that coming from the admin penalty system, or the APS system that I told you about in the capital program. So we initially put it in the parking enforcement budget, and then it was one of the reduction strategies where we moved, in working with the city, moved it over to the capital program, and we'll be working to actually incorporate it into the services capital program. We also looked at premium pay and made a number of reductions there, as well as other strategies that were employed, such as the hiring moratorium, a review of historical spending and trends in that historical spending, discretionary items, any policy issues that would allow us to reduce the budget. So we were able to bring those pressures down by $3 million, but we still have an increase that is equal to 1.72% for 2017. So I'll just give you a quick walkthrough of the accounting. As I mentioned earlier, salaries and related costs are the largest component of this budget. 88% of this budget is for salary costs. 12% is actually related to other equipment and business requirements that are needed to run parking operations. So much like with the service, we actually went through as many strategies and incorporated as many strategies as we could to reduce this budget. Ultimately, it comes down to people. And people are important, just like they are in the service, because people actually perform the services that parking enforcement does with respect to enforcement. They ensure the safe and orderly flow of traffic, and they ensure that revenues accrue to the city where there are situations of non-compliance. So the total budget request for parking is $46.7 million, and that is 1.72% higher than 2016.
Okay, that's it. Any deputants? Seeing none, I'll bring it into board. Any questions? Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, can we go back to the slide that's sort of in pro forma form? I'm just wondering, why is the APS, it's in there, but why is it backed out at a different amount?
Sorry, yeah, that's a very good question. The reason why it's
That's
back-
why I asked it.
It's, if you'll, the difference is 440,000.
Yeah.
And I'll just go, whoops. Okay. So you'll see the line item that says APS reserve contribution. That is the increase to the operating budget that's required to fund the vehicle and equipment reserve for the additional digital technology piece for the parking handhelds.
So they're moving the initial buy over there, but going forward, we're gonna keep the replacement reserve here in this budget?
That's correct. So you have a one-time cost to actually buy the initial.
Right, right.
And then this, as Sandra mentioned in her capital, in order to fund the replacement, we actually have to make annual contributions so that when year 5 comes up and we need to replace it, there's
Yeah.
actual money there. And that's what the 440 represents. So it's actually in the Park and Enforcement's operating budget. Yes.
Okay, I see. And then the other thing was, the APS, another big procurement, not nearly as big as the other one, but that's scheduled, you're pretty sure that will happen, the whole invoice will be paid in this year? Or is that just the initial?
No, in fact, this will happen in 2017. And it's really important that it happens before the end of 2017 because the current devices that our parking enforcement are using are obsolete. They're not supported.
Right.
They're breaking. So that whole process, so we're going to do a joint process that includes the digital equipment all in one process. So the vendors will actually be able to bid on a whole solution.
And you think you can execute that by the end of the
We have to.
third quarter? Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none,
Nope.
anybody to speak?
No, I'm good.
Seeing that nobody wants to speak, so I will then move
Sorry.
recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I just had one thing, and we should probably address it here. Because it was a comment, remember we had a deputation on this at the Budget Committee on the conversion to APS. And a resident asked us about it, he asked us about it after, at the end of the meeting. We'd already adjourned. And I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. But it was his main concern. When we change over to APS, these are parking violations, which are appealable. You can, carry in your ticket and say, well, for instance, my wheelchair permit was in the wrong place. What is going to be the process for, if a parking violation like that happens under APS, how do you appeal it? Sorry.
My name is Mekpo Chaudhary. I work with park enforcement as a planner. So right now, the city is finalizing all the details, how the hearing process would be set up. So they will have hearing officers where the member who will receive a ticket, they will go and they're finalizing the whole process, like how the tickets will be settled.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. So they will go to the city?
Yes, instead of going to the court, they will go to a tribunal and they will have hearing officers and screening officers. And they will decide on disputed tickets.
So it'd be more like a dispute resolution process
Yes.
than a court-based process?
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
It takes it out of the
Thank you.
judicial system.
Right. So, but the documentation that the deputy, he's left now for the day, but he was here earlier. The documentation he's looking for, that he's going to have to follow through the city's documents on this. They'll see that when they're looking at revenue services types of items at government management. Okay, so I'll let him know.
Thank you. As I said earlier, since nobody else wants to say it.
Just
You want to say
one
something?
last item, just so the board knows where we go from here. So This is the first step in terms of getting a board-approved budget that now will go to the City Budget Committee and will be considered with other divisional agency and commission budgets. That'll happen, and the city will have a budget launch, I think, in early December. From there, it then just follows the normal process through Executive Committee and ultimately onto Council in February of next year. So, so certainly from a capital perspective, we will not move forward on anything until that approval is in place.
Right. Okay, so the recommendation from Chief of Police, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. The next presentation item is TPSB 2017 operating budget. Joanne, you have it. Yeah, be quick.
So thank you. This is your budget that supports your governance role. And just your governance rules on the screen, and I won't tell you what it is because you all know it well. But the budget is really divided into three areas. The first is salary and benefit budget for the board's approved staff complement of 6, and remuneration for those board members, the appointees who are entitled to receive remuneration, including the remuneration for a full-time chair. Second component of the budget is a small amount, and it's actually approximately $60,000 for the day-to-day administration of the board. And the third item of the budget are the draws and contributions to the reserve for labor relations legal costs, as well as an interdepartmental chargeback for the services of City Legal, who, as you know, act as general counsel to the board. In terms of preparing the 2017 budget, there was a substantial effort made to achieve the city's reduction target of 2.6%. And so as part of that exercise, and I'll just flip quickly to the summary of the budget, we were able to absorb the salary increases that the board had approved for its staff. We were able to absorb the $36,000 portion of the city's unallocated reductions in our 2016 budget. We've also, however, reduced contributions to reserves, which, while succeeding in reducing our budget, are really not sustainable in future years. We also eliminated a $35,000 chargeback for the city's audit services. The board had not used that service in the past year, and so as a result, we have eliminated that in an attempt to achieve savings. You will also recall in 2016, the board had a one-time draw from the city's innovation reserve in the amount of $250,000. That is now no longer a feature of our budget. And as you recall, that money was used to fund the startup costs for the board's electronic agenda system. It was used to fund consulting support in the ongoing development of the board's street checks policy. It was also used to provide some assistance to the board in communications and financial analysis. So those were one-time costs in 2016. Those no longer appear in the budget. So these measures alone would result in a budget that is 2.6% below the 2016 budget. But just in the last month, very recently, the board has settled a human rights complaint. And as part of that settlement, which is agreed to, the board has agreed to fund the retainer of an expert who will come in and actually continue on some good work that the service and the board have started in terms of addressing accommodations and appropriate service to transgendered persons. So that is a $55,000 pressure for unanticipated pressure for 2017. And it's not a one-time cost. There will likely be costs in 2018, though perhaps lesser costs. So that was unexpected. You will receive more detail on this at your December meeting, but it's really prevented us from achieving that reduction that we had hoped we might successfully find. So with all of that in mind, the requested budget is just short of 2.3 million, which is a 0.2% reduction over the 2016 approved budget.
Any questions? Okay. So you want to speak?
I had the motion to move because we have another late breaking add-on. I'll read that first. That the board increase its requested operating budget for 2017 in the amount of $12,000 to enable the board to retain a criminologist to review and report to the board on the street check practice research conducted in other jurisdictions. This will result in a total budget request that brings it back up to 2.3 and 9,100. And so if I could just say, I think that brings us almost to,
I think that brings us to maybe about 0.23% over the 2016
right.
budget.
And so essentially what we're saying, Mr. Chair, is that with those unanticipated expenses, we're having trouble here both meeting the target and absorbing wage increases. And I feel as if we should stand on that and send it to the city budget, because in meeting past targets and because of the size of the division, this is not the only small division having the difficulty doing this. Where they have to absorb something, they don't actually have places to absorb it. And so while we're deferring what should be a contribution to the reserve, we find ourselves with no room to absorb. The cutting the paper clips and the pencils has happened long ago. The big devourer of resources here are unanticipated legal expenses, and that's been a trend for the last couple of years, leaving it hard to absorb efficiencies like this. So, I think we should take it to the budget committee, but we should, really all of these budgets, we take to the budget committee knowing that there could be further deliberations because they have pressures of their own. If we don't get good news back from the province, we'll be looking at all of these envelopes. But I don't know if there's any use in looking for something to cut here on a budget this small.
Any questions, any other further comments? So I will support this, and since Councillor Carroll is part of the City Budget Committee, he will speak up on it, I expect. So I will support this, and I will
I'm
second
not
it.
moving a motion, but I'm assuming
you're
if we
moving
get
this
there
motion
and it's
anyways.
not enough, that not some of these budgets will come back. They will come back as a package. We need more.
Right.
Yeah.
So I will second your motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Now we go back to item number 4. And the Chief Administrative Investigation, Councillor Carroll. You were holding it? Yes. You can release it? Okay, it's released, and so to be received, Ms. Molyneux, seconder, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Now we go to actually one more, and that is a submission from Mr. Sewell from the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, the last page of the yellow sheets. It says he's requesting a policy for internet use, and I do have a motion to that for this particular one, that the board refer the submission to the chief to review and to determine whether service governance addresses the issue that they have raised and provide a response to the board.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what it is that the TPAC submission
That
is
one
addressing.
the last sheet, okay. The subject is a policy for internet use. We wish this item to be scheduled on the board agenda for October 20th, given the significant use in the rise of internet and social media. It's entirely reasonable for police officers to make full use of these tools. But strong policy should be established for the use of internet and social media by police officers, just as there are policies for other activities that the police officers and the police force are involved with. The policy should be comprehensive and broad, covering what information. So what I'm suggesting is that we defer this to the chief to report back to us.
So now that I have it in front of me, I would just suggest that perhaps we amend the motion to reference that the TPAC submission is a request to,
On the policy.
on a draft internet use policy for the Toronto Police.
Right. Chief, do you have any comments? Oh, you don't have it.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of that. Thank you. Now I do.
Sorry, yeah. The service is indeed using social media already, so it's just a matter of asking for a report back as to, so that we can discuss it at a future date.
So could we change that to internet procedure?
Right.
Yeah.
So, we're just asking for a report back, so then we can, in future, decide what needs to be done. Like, within the service itself, do you have anything, any guidelines? Okay? Yeah. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. With that, any other new items? Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much for everyone. I held up. Now I got to go back and rest. My cold is showing up again. I'm losing my voice.